Karen Reed trial is now over. State has went, they rest. Defense, they had 3 experts went up there to testify, and they have rest as well. And now they're working on jury instructions. And tomorrow we're going to hear closing arguments. So I think the judge said there's going to be about an hour for each side for closing arguments. And oh boy, 1 hour to Mr. Lawley for closing arguments. I sure as hell hope that his closing arguments will be a lot cleaner than his opening statement. Now, remember in the opening statement, he dropped a lot of names, not just names of people that were accused to be involved, but also names of paramedics, law enforcement. And honestly, to me, if I was a jury and I'm new and fresh to this, which they should be, right? It would have just been way too much coming at me all at once. And I'm trying to absorb everything, but I'm like confused who's who, what's what, and all that stuff, right? So I don't know. We'll see. I really do hope that he'll clean up a little bit in closing arguments. I highly doubt that, because as the trial progressed, I feel like he had moments where he could have been more clear with certain parts of testimonies, or he could have taken one part of the testimony and then really, I don't know. Like, one thing that always got to me, because remember when I asked you guys in the last time stream was, hey, I vaguely remember that there might have been taillight pieces in John O'Keefe's clothes, or maybe it was his injuries. I don't remember. And something like that would be very important for the Commonwealth's case, right? But the crazy thing to me was it was very hazy to me. If I was Mr. Lawley, and indeed if there was taillight pieces found in John O'Keefe's clothing, you would really kind of like pound in on that to make sure that's definitely in the jury's mind. Hi, Kiki. How are you doing today? So I don't know. Mr. Lawley falls short on a lot of things. There were some moments that he's had in cross-examinations where I'm like, oh, okay. Like, he's louder, he's clearer. He's still pretty wordy, but at least it makes it easier for me to listen to him when he's not just talking like this monotonously and just droning out, la, 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 la. Oh, sure says hi, by the way. Hi, Morden. How are you doing today? So, yeah, the Karen Reed trial is over. We'll do closing arguments, and the jury will deliberate. Oh, boy. Now, I've already listened to some parts of the defense's expert testimony, and honestly, these are the type of experts I expected to hear from the Commonwealth side. Like, their level of expertise, the way they carry themselves on the stand, their methodology for doing things. I don't know, just being very, very meticulous about what they're working on. Because remember, I'm still kind of like confused about that one woman who had 2 quadrant swabs, and she was trying to swab for dog DNA, right? And instead of using separate like set of swabs for each area, it was like, no, I just used 2 same swabs and then just did it for all the areas. It's like, what if later down the road becomes important as to where dog DNA could have been found? Like, if it was on like the right side, if it was on this part right here, if it was on here, like, you know, I feel like that would have been so important, and you want to be meticulous about that. But I don't know. I was like, oh, maybe that's just common. It just seems weird to me. Hi, lady. Hi, Moondog. How are you doing today? I hope you guys are all doing well. So when I hear from the defense's experts, and especially the one who does the crash reconstruction, the one who worked for the ARCCA, I think, the way that he approached this entire thing, the way he approached, like, okay, what happened? How could it have happened? Let's try X, Y, and Z experiments and see, you know, if it happened this way, if it happened this way, you know, instead of going into it like with Trooper Paul. My sense with Trooper Paul was like Trooper Proctor and you know, some other law enforcement was like, hey, the car hit John O'Keefe, she was driving it, and I want you to prove how that happened. Instead of being a little bit more open-minded and exploring like different avenues, like, okay, like, what if this happened? What if that happened? And let's try different experiments. And I also was really disappointed when I heard that the only thing that they did with Karen Reed's car was they did 2 sets of experiments. I don't want to say experiments. It's not even experiments. Experiments is more like the methodology of it is more intensive, right? They essentially took the car in reverse and did it twice to see if like the backup cameras were working, if their sensors were working. And then I think they took the car they went into like forward and did it twice to make sure like everything was working. But what I expected to hear was like, okay, let's take the car at 24 miles per hour, because that's what they think that Karen Reed was going when she hit John O'Keefe. And let's see how it could have lined up with this injury, how it could have lined up with this injury, and how it could have, like, the way they described it to me just seemed kind of messy. It was like, oh, you know, we think it hit John, and then he might have like half spun, and then he might have like kind of like maybe got launched into the lawn, or it could have been this way. I don't know. I just felt like you'll see, I guess, when the ARCCA guy testifies, he's like, you know what? Like, we went into it and with like pretty much an open mind, and we're like, okay, well, what if it was a taillight that was being what if it was a glass that was being thrown at the taillight? What if it was, the taillight came into connection with like the head, how the damage would have been done and all that stuff at different speeds? Like, that to me just seems way more thorough than what Trooper Paul did. And I think that's why when Trooper Paul went in his direct examination, he did okay, in my opinion. But it was when you're in cross-examination that I think he got completely destroyed. It was because he was not very... He only kind of like stayed in one lane and focused on that instead of being more expansive with what could have happened to John O'Keefe. I don't know. That was just, the building a cannon thing. That sounds really fucking cool too. So, and he definitely seemed to have more knowledge in like physics and all that stuff. I know Trooper Paul did maybe like, he probably studied like basic physics. But honestly, I'm very impressed that the defense has, a crash reconstructionist guy who's up there trying out different things to see what could have happened, and then backing that up with a biomechanical engineer guy. Because I don't think we have a biomechanical engineer for the Commonwealth. It was just Trooper Paul. I was like, okay, I feel like we need more experts to really explain how the injuries could have happened on John O'Keefe. So anyways, we're going to start with... oh shoot, I didn't already have this lined up. We're gonna start off with the defense's pathologist, and you know what? I thought he did pretty well in the stand. And same thing, very similar to the other expert that they had, Dr. Marie Russell. She's the one who had like very extensive CV. She worked in law enforcement for a little bit. She worked in forensics for a bit. She did like she worked in the coroner's office in LA, very high traffic area. She also worked in like the trauma center, also very high traffic area as well. And I think he also has experience working in California, again, and also a very high traffic area. So you get to see lots of different cases. So whether it's like people getting hit by cars, whether people, getting mauled or attacked by animals, dogs, etc. So I thought his background's pretty impressive. I am going to skip through his credentials, though, but I just wanted you guys to know it seemed pretty impressive. He's like from Ireland and then came over from Ireland to America. It just did. And honestly, I just think that's just how it happens. Like, say when you're working on something and if you're not super thorough about it, when you present it in your own words, it could look good. But then when people are asking you questions about it, it shows how not thorough you are, and it looks really bad. And that's what happened in cross-examination, in my opinion, with Trooper Paul.
Good morning.
I'm going to ask you to, when you testify, sir, please speak into the microphone if you can, loud and clear.
I will.
All right, thank you.
Is it working?
I don't know if the microphone even does much for the people in the courtroom. I think the microphone is mostly for us, but I don't know. Unless they need to fix their audio sound system or something. Because they keep telling everyone, hey, speak up, speak up. You got to speak up. The jury can't hear you. And if the jury can't hear you, that's a huge freaking issue.
It should be. All right, thank you. All right, Ms. Little.
Good morning. Could you state your first name and spell your last name for the record, please?
My first name is Frank, and the last name is Sheridan, Sheridan.
And if you can make sure to keep your voice up just because the air conditioner is very loud.
Yeah, I noticed that. Okay.
Dr. Sheridan, what is your profession?
All right, so I'm just going to do pathologist, and we are going to skip through his credentials. They are very impressive. I just want to get to the meat of it.
Neuropathology. Neuropathology being disease and injury. I haven't been doing that since autopsies myself. So I spent most of my time actually performing autopsies. But I did have, as I said, administrative roles and the role of CERT, S-E-R-T, police reports.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Jennifer.
Hampton Police Department. Am I missing anything out? I don't think so.
Taxi.
Yeah.
Your Honor, permission to publish has been previously marked as Exhibit 19.
Sure.
Case.
Yes, it is.
Can you describe the injuries that you see in this photograph?
These injuries that you're looking at here on the arm are abrasions, which are friction injuries, basically. We classify them under the general category of blunt force injury, but these particular ones are abrasions. The abrasions being where the outer layer of the skin, the epidermis as it's called, has been scraped off. These are friction injuries, essentially.
And based on your review...
Also, it would have been nice for them to line up the size of the tail light with John O'Keefe's injuries, but I feel like the tail light, I don't know if it's even, like, if he were to extend his arm straight, I don't even know if the tail light would cover where the injuries are. And then remember, my other theory was like, okay, well, what if he had his elbows bent, which would make sense because he would be holding a cocktail glass, right? But I don't know. I just don't see how the lines would add up with how a tail light would scrape his arm if his elbows were bent, because I feel like these scratches would be opposite. I demonstrated this in my last stream. Like this, it would be going this way, and then the scratches on this side would be going like this way, diagonal this way. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse or not. I'm not a crash reconstructionist person, but that's just how I'm imagining it in my head.
The information discussed earlier, can you tell, as well as your review of these photographs, can you tell whether these injuries were sustained before or after death?
These injuries were sustained before death. We call them ante-mortem, A-N-T, mortem meaning before death. And that's based primarily on their color. And you have to take other things into consideration, but that's the basics of it. If these had been post-mortem, they would have a more yellowish, orange color, usually yellow.
In your professional opinion, based on a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, are those injuries consistent with being struck by a vehicle while holding a drinking glass?
Objection.
Sustained.
May we approach, Your Honor? Sure.
Approach your moon.
Be
Go.
it for a while then. We'll stop the air conditioning for a while then. We want to make sure we hear you.
Oh God, they're gonna turn off the AC.
Dr. Sheridan, are these injuries consistent with a motor vehicle accident, in your opinion?
Sustained.
I would say in general, no. I mean,
So that objection was sustained. I think Ms. Little's going to put it to you in a different way.
that's right.
If you can assume for purposes of this question that this individual was involved in a motor vehicle collision as a pedestrian, based on your review of his photographs, are those injuries consistent with having been struck by a vehicle?
Objection.
Sustained. Why don't you come back from it?
Also, in Lale's opening statement, I re-listened to it a couple weeks ago, but in his opening statements, his theory is that John O'Keefe was struck twice by Karen O'Keefe. I think he said that Karen struck John, and then while he was down, struck him again, and then drove off. But there has been nothing from any of the experts that has testified about John O'Keefe being struck twice. So I'm like, I don't know. Did Mr. Lale get confused, or did the experts get confused, or is there some like wires that were crossed? I don't know. And then the other thing was, it seems like to me, Lale thinks Karen Reed had access to the ring stuff and deleted some footage. But we find out from, I think, his own expert, it was one from his own expert, that the ring stuff was only on John's phone, not on the computer or the laptops that they seized in John's house. But we remember the phone was with John the entire time, because the other theory, I was like, okay, well, maybe Karen took John's phone and then planted it back underneath his body or something, right? But no, the phone, as his other expert testified, the phone was with John O'Keefe the entire time, up until the part where Carrie Roberts found underneath him and then gave it to paramedics. Paramedics gave it to law enforcement. So there are some holes in his theories that are being proved by his own experts. And I'm like, I'm very confused, just very confused. If I was the jury, I don't know, I'd probably be annoyed as hell.
Dr. Sheridan, how many autopsies have you conducted on individuals who were involved in pedestrian vehicle motor collisions?
Involved in what, pedestrian vehicle?
Yeah.
Well over 100.
What other experience do you have in terms of conducting autopsies with individuals who have been involved in motor vehicle collisions?
Well, I mean, if you take motor vehicle accidents in general, they'd be probably nearly a quarter of my total number of autopsies. So in other words, that'd be close to 3,000. Yeah, that's about right.
Based on your professional experience, what is your opinion regarding whether those injuries are consistent with a pedestrian being struck by a motor vehicle?
Objection.
I'm going to allow it. You can answer that, Doctor. Can you answer that?
I can answer it, yes.
So go right ahead.
Okay. The question was,
Maybe it's the judge that needs to keep her voice up.
to be precise, can you just rephrase it? I mean, I said yes, I can answer it, but I can't remember exactly how you phrased it.
Yes, based on your extensive training and experience, what is your opinion regarding whether those injuries are consistent with an individual being struck by a vehicle?
If you mean struck in that part of the body, on the arm, like
Yes.
directly, I would say no, it doesn't look like that at all.
And can you explain that?
Well, if you're hit by a vehicle, or whichever part of your body is hit, if it's a significant impact at all, you're going to get bruising, and we don't have any bruising here. We just have I would call linear abrasions without any bruising. So that does not look to me at all remotely.
Sorry, I'm trying to boost the audio a little bit, and then I kind of like distorted it. Let me try it again.
Like an impact from a motor vehicle.
What would you expect to see if an individual's arm were struck by the rear of a motor vehicle?
Well, as I just said a second ago, primarily a lot of bruising, and that's what we don't see here. You might see, well, depending on the circumstances, you might see other things like a fracture or fractures, but you would at least expect bruising.
And honestly, I think everything that he's saying seemed to be in line with the state's medical examiner, where she did say, you know, this isn't really classic injuries of a pedestrian collision. And Molly was like, well, you know, it's probably because, you know, when you're looking at people getting struck by vehicles, there's so many different factors, right? She's like, yeah, I mean, there are factors like how fast they were going, the position of the pedestrian, X, Y, and Z, and stuff like that. But she did say, like, you know, these aren't classic signs of a pedestrian collision, which could be interpreted as like, well, maybe the way that he was hit was in a way where it's like not like front collision, high speed collision, right? It was more like he was getting backed up into. But I don't know. It's still, though, a lot of these people are just saying these just aren't classic signs of someone getting hit by a car.
In your professional opinion, based on your many years of experience, have you conducted any autopsies involving individuals who were involved in any sort of animal attack?
Animal attacks in general, yes, quite a few actually. But when I say quite a few, it's not an enormously common event, but I've done probably at least a dozen or so involving deaths where an animal was involved one way or another.
Have you conducted any autopsies in which any individual was attacked by a dog?
Yes, I have a few.
Can you describe that?
Well, I'd have to just refresh my memory out of the blue here. Well, first of all, I had a number of cases, 3 or 4, I think, over the years involving children, was primarily children who were killed by feral dogs, and the dogs attacked the kid and killed them. So I had that a few times. But then I've also had cases where an animal or a dog particularly was involved, but wasn't the actual cause of death, so to speak. But they were involved in something that was happening and left some traces of their activity in the form of bite marks or scratch marks.
In your professional opinion, are those injuries consistent with an animal attack?
Are they consistent with what?
An animal attack.
I would say they are, yes. I'm not 100% sure about this, but my initial reaction when I saw this photograph was that it was probably an animal mark, and most likely I would say a dog. Scrape marks with the paws, and possibly also a bite mark from the teeth as well. Possibly. I'm not 100% sure. I didn't get a chance to analyze it right there on the spot, so to speak. But my basic impression is that these are consistent with marks caused by, say, a dog using his paws or claws, if you want to put it that way.
State's theory from Trooper Paul is John's arm hit and broke the tail light. When I was listening to Trooper Paul's testimony, honestly, I couldn't really understand how he thought it happened, but he wrapped up at the end. He thinks that John's fist came into contact with the back of the car. That's why there was a dent there. And then the arm got scraped by the tail light. It got hit by the tail light and then possibly broke and then got scraped. I was thinking there might be another theory. I'll get to that part when the ARCCA person testifies, because he brought up something that I thought was really interesting. And I was like, oh, maybe it could have happened differently, possibly.
And possibly the teeth as well.
And if there's a pointer up there, would it be possible to direct the jury to the injuries that you're referring to on the screen? There should be a little laser pointer up there, I believe.
I don't know that I see one.
Hey, Barbacoa. Yeah, I mean, the state, they have not proven beyond a reasonable doubt, in my opinion. If I was a member of the jury, I would probably be thinking, I don't know. I mean, what else could if he had been hit by? It could have been the car, but honestly, all the experts, from what they say that it doesn't look like a classic pedestrian collision. I didn't really get a clear understanding of like how it really was done, because everyone has said so far that John's injury in the back of the head would have rendered him unconscious. So it's like, okay, well, did he hit his head on the curb and then he got up or crawled over to the grass and that's where he ultimately ended up? I don't know, because everyone said that if he was hit like that, he would have been unconscious, and at some point his brain would have started swelling up, and then hypothermia would have also kicked in, and he would have just ended up succumbing to his injuries and just being out there in the cold. I don't know. There's just too many what ifs. Just too many what ifs. The dog, German Shepherd mix.
Not there.
I'm just not there with the dog theory, the dog biting theory, because they didn't find any dog DNA on his sweater.
Sure.
Okay.
And if you're like me and you're like, well, why didn't they swap his arm? Was because I'm assuming at that point John O'Keefe was probably, I don't know if they cremated him or if they just buried him. The dog theory didn't come out until later, and so they probably just like, oh, well, we have the sweater and evidence, so we'll just like swap that. So you would imagine there being like dog saliva and stuff, but I don't know. This is just such a weird one, because another thing with the, well, actually, I don't want to confuse you guys. We'll talk about it as it comes up later. I hope I remember.
Using the laser pointer, could you indicate the injuries that you just testified are consistent with scratch marks?
Actually, in a sense, they're all consistent with scratch marks in the sort of the more generic sense of whether it's the paws or the teeth, they're going across the skin rather than going straight into it. So they're all of these marks are generally consistent with, if you want to call them scratch marks. So I don't know if this will work on the screen, but you basically got what looks like there's one pair there with possibly a third one in the middle. There are two very clear parallel marks there with another one fainter in the center. Then you have, going closer to the elbow, you've got another 2 or 3, whichever way you look at that. But at the elbow, it's...
Oh, yeah, there's definitely issues with chain of custody for a lot of the evidence in this case. With the clothing, I definitely kept that in mind as well, how it wasn't, they had the clothes, and then, I don't know, I guess wasn't really officially entered until, I don't know if it was 6 days later or if it was like weeks later. From what I remembered, I thought it was weeks later, but I could have gotten that mixed up with some of the taillight pieces. So I was thinking, okay, well, another theory was, because there were taillight pieces in the sweater, and I know people are probably thinking like, oh, maybe, the taillight pieces were embedded by someone else, right? Like it was planted there. But for me, for the dog DNA, I just don't understand how you would clean a sweater well enough to get rid of all the dog DNA, but then still have all the blood on there. So that to me was kind of like a mystery. That's why like I'm not completely buying to the dog DNA stuff yet, because there's too many like unknowns for me. So I'm like, I don't think so, because they didn't find any dog DNA. But at the same time, could there have been a way where they could have cleaned the sweater, gotten rid of the dog DNA, but then the blood would still be on there and I don't be thorough enough? Like, I don't know. But I did have issues with the person that swabbed the sweater, which I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the stream, because I found it weird that you would use the same swabs to do multiple parts of the sweater instead of just doing one swab for this part, one swab for this part, one swab for that part, just to kind of separate it out. Because if they were to find dog DNA, it might have been helpful to know where the dog DNA would have been found. Was it on the bottom part of the sleeve? Was it on the elbow part? Was it on this part? You know what I mean? So yeah, there are a lot of with this case. Like I said, I have a lot of issues with the Commonwealth's experts and the people that worked on the evidence and all that stuff.
You have that part of the elbow there is what I would think is the most likely candidate here for a bite mark, because it has something of the configuration of the outline of teeth. And then the ones on the forearm are a little bit less obvious, but they're still consistent in general with
that's what I was going to get into about the blood. They did not find any blood on the car. Yeah, no blood in the car. I think they even tried to check the undercarriage as well. Just in case. No blood in the car, no blood on the tail light. Yeah, to me, that was weird. That's why I'm thinking there might have been another theory of how the tail light was broken. And we'll get into that with the other expert. Multiple layers of clothing. So where's the outer coat? From my understanding and from what we've seen in the footages, John O'Keefe was only wearing one layer of upper body clothing. It was like a long sleeve hoodie, but to me it didn't look like one of those like thick hoodies that you would see. Like I have like hoodies in my closet that are like really thick, it seems to be just like a very thin layer, and it had like a hood on it.
I would say claw marks or maybe from the teeth.
Dr. Sheridan, if you assume that the decedent was standing with his arm extended in this manner, and he was struck with the rear taillight of a 7,000-pound Lexus only on the arm, such that it spun him around and propelled him 30 feet, do you have an opinion as to whether or not these arm injuries are consistent with that scenario?
Objection.
All right, I'll see you inside that.
And, Trooper Paul said it himself that the vehicle weighs 7,000 pounds. Because if you think that John was projectiled and flung onto, the lawn, well, it's like, can you really get that injury from hitting the grass with the back of your head? Because he didn't mention like, oh, maybe John hit the fire hydrant or maybe John hit the flagpole. It seems like he thought that John just like landed on the grass and then got the injury. It's like, well, is that possible to get that bad of a skull injury on grass? I was thinking like maybe on concrete, but I mean, I don't know, right? I don't fucking know. Yeah. And then also to be hit in such a way where you're flying, but then have no bruising. It's a lot of questions.
Largest public...
Oh, what the hell happened? Did they take a morning recess? Okay, coming back. Yeah, Jackson's like, the pirouette thing. Oh my God, Jackson. He's never going to let the jury forget the pirouette.
You are unmuted.
Also, just keep your voice out for this question.
I'll try.
Assume the decedent was standing with his arm outstretched like this and was struck by the rear of an SUV, only in his arm at 24 miles per hour. Are the injuries in Exhibit 19 consistent with that scenario?
No, I do not think so.
Can you describe that?
Well, as I think I've already mentioned before,
I don't know if you guys were able to hear that because there's a lot of breathing, but she was asking, okay, well, if his arm was outstretched like this and he was hit by a vehicle 24 miles per hour, would it look like this? And he's like, no, I don't think so.
It's not there, but should be there, given that idea, that scenario, is there should be bruising, at least bruising, if not perhaps even more than that, but bruising for sure. Secondly, the appearance of these injuries, their pattern, if you wanted to call it that, the way they're distributed doesn't seem to fit the idea of the rear of a vehicle being the impacting object.
And at 24 miles per hour, would you expect to see fractures or breaks in the arm?
You could do. There'd be other factors involved as to it would depend on a lot of things, but it's possible, yeah.
I'd like to direct your attention to the injury that Mr. O'Keefe sustained to his head. Do you recall that injury?
To the head?
To the head.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Could you describe that injury for the jury?
Well, there were a few minor injuries on the face, but the major injury, and indeed the main cause of death, was an impact to the back of the head, slightly to the right of the midline of the back of the head, and where there was a laceration. A laceration is another type of blunt force trauma, but a laceration is where the skin is actually opened up or split, so you get bleeding from a laceration. So there was a laceration, as I said, in the back of the scalp.
The crash daddy? Who's the crash daddy, Katie? The crash reconstructionist guy? I think we should rename him Cannon Daddy.
What's called the occipital area, and beneath that, when the skin was moved away as part of the autopsy, there was.
Oh, I mean, he's like an older guy, okay? And if I was testifying up there and I'm talking, I don't know, I probably would be running out of air too. Also, these microphones are very, very sensitive, so you can really pick up on when people are breathing. I also boosted up the audio and gain and stuff like that. All right? It's not his fault. It's not his fault.
Extensive bruising, hemorrhage, in other words, in the scalp at that same point. There was a fracture that started at that point in the skull, but traveled all the way forward to the frontal areas of the skull. So you have the impact. The impact site is clear because, as I said, you've got the laceration. That's where the impact was. So you have the impact with the scalp hemorrhage there and the skull fractures. Then the brain itself it had injuries, significant injuries. First of all, there was bleeding on the surface of the brain, and that's very common in situations like this. But in addition to that, there were extensive bruises. Contusions is the real word, actually, but they are essentially bruises of the brain substance itself, and that they were in several different parts of the brain, including the frontal areas, which are near the forehead, and also the temporal, which are towards the side, more or less. And then there was also hemorrhage deep inside the brain, in the ventricles, which are open areas in the center of the brain. All of these things were described in the neuropathology report, and you can see them in the photographs that were part of the neuropathology report as well as the autopsy. As a result of, I should say, the
Okay, here I will take off my volume booster. I think that will help him a little bit. It won't sound as like wheezy.
To the brain began to swell, and that's what it usually does after major trauma.
Does that sound better?
And as a result of the swelling, you had what's called herniation, where the brain, if you want to think of it this way, the brain is trying to expand, but it can't because the skull is around it. So it begins to put pressure, pushing, especially downwards towards the top of the spinal cord. And eventually, as happened in this case, it's quite clear from the photographs, the brain herniated downwards, the brainstem particularly herniated downwards, and this would have been the final straw, so to speak. That's what would lead to respiratory failure and death. So this was a fatal injury for certain.
And what impact would that type of injury have had on the individual after sustaining it?
Once this impact occurred, Mr. O'Keefe would have been unconscious. He would still be capable of breathing for a while until that brain swelling took over and pushed the...
And that's what the other... I think it was the neuropathology woman and the medical examiner. I think they both said the same thing, that the injury that the injuries that Brian, oh my God, the injuries of John O'Keefe's brain, that would have led him to be unconscious. So it seems like to me, from different experts, it seems like the moment that he got that skull fracture and everything went into motion, it seems like he would have been unconscious right at that point in time, right? So, the theory that I initially had was like, oh, maybe he hit the curb and then he crawled to the lawn or rolled over to the lawn. But from what everyone says, it seems like he would have been unconscious like right away.
the brain stem down. But he would immediately from the point of impact, he would have been unconscious for sure.
He had been able to stand up, move, or walk.
No, he would have been unconscious completely.
Do you have any opinion regarding whether that injury is consistent with having been struck on the ground on dirt or grass?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
I'll rephrase it. That was a poorly worded question. Is that injury consistent with striking dirt or grass?
Like, for example, falling onto grass?
Yes.
No, I don't think so.
Yes, that's what I was wondering too, because if he ultimately landed on the grass and he was unconscious, then that means the back of the injury would have happened, the back of his head injury would have happened on the grass. And I'm like, is that possible?
If there's a fall involved here, and there could be, it would be onto a hard surface. But the grass, and as I understand from all the material I reviewed, there was also some snow, and so that might even cushion the impact even a little bit more. But even without the snow, grass is basically too soft for somebody falling and hitting their head on it to get the injuries I've just described.
In addition to focusing on the injuries that were present, what significance do you place on the absence of injuries in conducting an autopsy?
What significance do I put on what?
In addition to focusing on the injuries that are present, what significance do you place on the absence of injuries when conducting an autopsy?
Well, as you put it there, it's a rather general question, but I mean, when you're doing an autopsy, you obviously want to see what is there and what's not, and everything can be relevant, including absent things. Now, in this particular case, there are a number of features of things that are absent that are important. I've already alluded to one, and that is on the arm. If that was an impact from the vehicle, I would expect bruising.
Hey, Dub says, I honestly don't think Karen did it anymore.
But do you want me to continue?
Yes.
No. But if Mr. O'Keefe was struck with it depends obviously what part of the body is theoretically involved. But if a vehicle hits you, whether it's the back of the vehicle or the front, you're going to have, as long as it's not going extremely slowly, if it's going at any speed at all, any significant speed, it's going to cause at least bruising. And that in this particular case, one of the things that struck me was that there was a distinct absence of bruising on the torso. There was the chest, abdomen, hips, whatever. And also, in most cases that I've ever been involved in where a pedestrian was hit by a vehicle, there are injuries on the legs, including fractures, which are very common on the legs. So the absence of all of these things in this case, I think, is important.
Have you conducted autopsies involving individuals who were involved in fights or altercations?
Yes, many, many times.
Approximately how many?
Gosh, I have no idea, and it's a lot. I mean, I've done, I said earlier that between over 12, maybe 13,000 total autopsies. Of those, I'm only giving you estimates here, but over 1,000 would have been homicides.
I have him sped up at 1.5.
Of those, probably maybe a fifth, so about 200, would have involved blunt force trauma instead of, for example, a firearm or something like that. And in those cases, and of course, so all of those and other cases involving sharp force, homicides involving sharp force may have evidence of a struggle as well. So it's in the hundreds. Yeah.
In your expert medical opinion, are Mr. O'Keefe's injuries consistent with a fight or a physical altercation?
In a general sense, they can be. They could be, yes. He had, I alluded to it just briefly before, but the head injury, the major head injury I've described, but he also had a laceration over his right eyelid. He had some scrape marks on his face. He also had some bruises on the back of his right hand, which that kind of injury on the hands can be what we call a defensive injury. In other words, an injury that occurs when you're protecting yourself and you're hit hit either with another.
Oh, interesting. Because I was thinking about the knuckles, like if you would have bruising on the knuckles from like punching someone. But we did end up seeing that the bruises were actually on the back of his hand. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of weird then. But he's explained it in a way that's like, okay, well, if it's a physical altercation, it could have just been defensive wounds on maybe the back of the hand. Maybe, right? Like this? I don't know. Or would you cover like this? I don't know.
A fist or with a hard object, and you're protecting yourself. So I would say that some of the...
But then, I don't know, it's only on like one hand, though. One hand, the back of the right hand, not like anywhere else.
These findings I've just mentioned are consistent with the possibility of a physical altercation, yes.
Thank you. If I could have one moment.
Sure.
No further questions.
Okay, Mr. Lally.
All right, Mr. Lally, what you got? I had a dream last night with Lally. I had a dream because for some reason, I always dream about being back in middle school or high school. I don't know why. But I had a dream that I was back in high school and Lolly was my math teacher or something. And we were asking him like a bunch of questions. Have I ever been in a fight? Yes. I have quite a few. Wale. Come on, Ollie, what you got?
Morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
Injuries that you were just testifying.
I'd say it was the nightmare. I was so excited because we're asking him so many questions. I do have a lot of questions for Lolly. What, if any, therapy do you need after that dream corgi, sort of? You gotta throw the sort of in there. Oh, man. He really doesn't want to be definitive. He said possibly. Yeah, I mean, I think that's respected, especially when you have an expert going up there and he's not like super 100% sure, right? You don't want to be like, oh, it's 100% a fist fight, a physical altercation. Oh, it's 100% a dog bite, right? Because they weren't there. They weren't there to witness it, so they don't know 100% sure. They can only go off with what they've seen in their experiences. Be like, oh, it could have possibly been this. It could have possibly been X, Y, and Z. So I think when you have an expert that goes up there and they are way too cocky and they're like, no, it's 100% this. It's 100% that. Like, it just, to me, that would look really bad for the jury.
About to regarding Mr. O'Keefe, they were on his right knee, his right arm, as well as the back right side of his head. Is that correct?
Yes, I forgot to mention the knee, but yes, there were
I think the knee was barely anything.
injuries in those places, yes.
And understandable, but this isn't an autopsy you performed yourself, correct?
I did not perform myself, no.
You never saw the body. You're looking at photographs and reports, correct?
Yeah, I'm going by the photographs and the autopsy report, yes.
And contained within the materials that you reviewed, did you ever look at Mr. O'Keefe's medical records from the Good Samaritan?
Look at whose medical records, Mr. O'Keefe's?
Yes.
I looked at the medical records from Good Samaritan Hospital where he was pronounced dead, yes.
Okay, so you did look at those as well.
I did look at those, yeah. I thought I mentioned it earlier, maybe I forgot.
Now, with regard to what you reviewed of Mr. O'Keefe's injuries, you saw no injuries to his left arm, correct?
To his left arm? No, I don't think so, no.
No injuries to his left leg, correct?
No.
Injuries to his torso that you saw?
That's correct.
And no injuries to the back left side of his head, is that correct as well?
That's correct, yes.
Now,
I don't know how Lolly think it helps him because he has really emphasized that John O'Keefe's injuries are on that back right head many, many, many times. And I don't know what is the significance of that. Because just now he just said, you didn't see any injuries on the back left side of the head, did you? He's like, no. It's like, what's the significance that it's slightly on the right side?
you indicated that you observed or reviewed the autopsy reports as well as autopsy photographs and the death certificate, correct?
I did, yes.
Now, do you agree with Dr. Scortibello's determination?
Well, the state's theory is that he was struck by a vehicle and then he landed on the back of his head. That's why I wasn't sure if left side, right side sort of matters. What, if any?
The cause of death being multiple blunt force type injuries in conjunction with hypothermia.
I do agree with her, yes.
And you reviewed also the neuropathology report by Dr. Stonebridge.
I did, yes.
And do you agree or concur with the findings of Dr. Stonebridge contained within that report?
Yes, there were photographs taken during the neuropathology examination, which were independent confirmation for me of the things described in the report. Yes.
Now, with regard to autopsies that you performed in the past, well, let me ask you this first. As far as the injuries that you observed in the photographs to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, they were not the cause of Mr. O'Keefe's death, correct?
No, they were not. Mm-hmm.
With regard to autopsies that you performed in the past, in regard to there being some sort of animal involved as you were testifying before, is it normal to see just injuries related to an animal attack on just one portion of one piece of body?
Yes, in a general way. I mean, as I mentioned, I think when I was answering the question about the cases I've done involving animals, I tried to divide them into two groups because there's an important difference. Some of those cases were cases where the animals were responsible for the death itself. As I said, a bunch of feral dogs in one case, particularly that I remember. Another was a case where it wasn't a whole bunch of them, but there were two dogs, large dogs, and they killed the victims. Children. So those individuals had multiple injuries, including deep bite marks that were fatal, particularly in the neck area. But they also had, and I'm stretching my memory a bit because it's a while since I did these cases, but I do have a general recollection that in in those cases, I should say, in addition to the fatal injuries, there were also some non-fatal sort of things like paw marks. And I can't remember the distribution though on the body.
Do you remember as far as whether or not these injuries that you observed and not taking the child fatalities with the dog's maul, I'm presuming that those involve injuries to significant and extensive parts of the body, is that correct?
Yeah, those are the ones where the animals caused the death, yes. Mm-hmm. So
in the other instances that you were talking about, do you recall even whether or not those injuries that you observed were ante-mortem or post-mortem?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last part.
The other ones that you were talking about as far as the other animal attacks that you've seen.
Yeah.
Do you recall whether or not the injuries that you observed in those instances were ante-mortem or post-mortem?
Oh, antemortem. Well, actually, in one of the cases that comes to mind, the marks appeared to be post-mortem, and that was this person was actually a homicide victim, and they were lying outdoors, and their own dog. This was according to police, though, who came on the scene. When they arrived, there was a dog that turned out to be the victim's own dog, was pawing at the body, and the person was dead. But in another case that I can think of, the scratch marks from dog paws were ante-mortem, and they were confined to one place only. I'm trying to remember what part of the body. In this case, I had to testify later on. Yeah.
So Lolly's trying to say that, like, oh, well, the injuries were only on the right side of John O'Keefe's arm, and it's only like this portion right here, like I think like above, like middle forearm, and like maybe like right underneath like your shoulder area, ish. And Lolly's saying that, like, well, you know, if this was a dog attack, wouldn't there be attacks all over? And he's kind of explaining based on his experience what he's seen.
In this case that I'm thinking of now, the paw marks were limited to just one location. I can't remember exactly where they were, though. Whether it was the leg or the arm, I can't remember.
And that was post-mortem injuries that you're talking about there, correct?
No, in the second case here, they were ante-mortem. So in other words, there's been post-mortem and
And teased before.
ante-mortem, yes.
The injuries that you observed on Mr. O'Keefe's arm were to the posterior part of his arm, correct?
Yes, basically, the posterior.
No injuries that you observed on the anterior portion or the other side of the right arm, correct?
That's correct, yes.
No other injuries that you observed consistent with what you're talking about as far as an animal attack on any other part of Mr. O'Keefe's body, correct?
That's correct, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And from what you observed in the reports and the photographs, you can't say definitively what type of animal, correct?
That's correct, I can't.
And you can't say even if it was an animal or was a dog, what breed of dog that was, is that correct?
No, but if I had to try, and if I said it,
Not asking you to try, so I'm just asking whether or not you can say whether or not that what breed of dog it was.
no, I can't tell you what breed.
I was thinking of that too, Taxi, but they have a giant fence. And I was like, because at first I was like, oh, I wonder if the backyard's just kind of open. But when we looked at their property, their fence was pretty big, unless they left the fence open, maybe.
No.
You can't say whether or not those injuries were inflicted inside a house or outside of a house, is that correct?
Yeah, I have no idea.
You can't say when they occurred, correct?
Only that they were when he was still alive. Yeah, but other than that, no. And they are fresh looking. I mean, this is generally, so they look like they happened very shortly before death.
And when you say short time, you're talking about hours?
Minutes to hours, I would say.
Minutes, hours, but you can't.
I mean, I'm talking just based on the injuries themselves alone, leaving anything else out. You can't time injuries as exactly as you might think from CSI or one of these television programs, but they are generally fresh for sure. And but just looking at those on their own, I would have to say minutes to hours, yes.
Now, at some point, were you given or did you review any files from a lab at the University of California, Davis?
I'm not sure. In relation to what?
So are you aware that the State Police Lab in Massachusetts swabbed areas of the sleeve on the right arm of Mr. O'Keefe and sent samples from that in the areas where the injuries occurred on his right arm, and then sent that to a lab at UC Davis? Are you aware of that?
I'm not sure that I remember that, no.
And that's interesting to me too, because remember, Dr. Marie Russell, initially when she got the files, she didn't get the files from UC Davis determining that there was no dog DNA when they swabbed the clothing. And then also it was like something about Chloe's bite records. Like she didn't get that as well. And the defense was like, oh, I gave her everything. You know, I don't know what she looked at. She might have not looked at it, I guess. And then she went back out there and testified on the stand saying that like, oh, I did end up looking at it, and it might have just been like a technology thing where like she probably like got all these files and then just like didn't open it or didn't see it or something like that. But what's interesting to me is that this expert witness as well also said, oh, like, I don't know. I don't remember that. It's like, oh, did you get the results of it not being dog DNA on the sweater? And he's like, oh, I don't remember that. And then they also asked, I think about the bite marks. I think they'll get to it.
So you're equally unaware then
Which,
that,
like, as a jury to me, I'd be like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Did the defense forget to give it to him? Did they just not give it to him? Or did he just not remember? Or, I mean, I feel like he would remember, right? Maybe some sort of mistake happened to both of the witnesses.
that when that was tested, there was no canine DNA found from any of those swabbings in the area where the injuries that you're describing.
Hi, Christine. How are you doing today? Good afternoon. Hello.
Then that when that was tested, there was no canine DNA found from any of those swabbings in the area where the injuries that you're describing as scratch marks or bite marks occurred.
I wasn't aware of that. I must have missed it.
Are you aware of any sort of bite history or a specific animal at 34 Fairview being involved in attacks on other dogs?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood that question.
Were you aware that there was a dog that resided at 34 Fairview Road?
Am I aware that there was a dog there?
Yes.
I was informed there was, yes.
Were you also informed that that dog, months later, after January 2022, was involved in an incident in which it attacked another dog, humans intervened, and one of the humans was bitten?
No, I didn't know that.
Are you aware that there were photographs of an actual bite mark from that actual dog months after January 29th? Were you shown any of that?
No, I don't believe I was.
Now, sir, did you write a report in relation to what you observed or anything in regard to your opinion or your testimony that you're testifying to here today?
I didn't write a report as such, but I signed a declaration early on in my involvement in this case.
And that was a declaration or an affidavit that you signed under the pains and penalties of perjury back on January 31st, 2023. Is that correct?
Sorry, what's about that?
When you're talking about a declaration, you're referring to an affidavit that you filed with the court under pains and penalties of perjury in January of 2023.
I didn't think it was January, but however, there was only one, so whatever you have.
Now, at any point in time were you made aware that there were microscopic pieces of the defendant's tail light as small as 1/60th of an inch by 1/60th of an inch that were found in Mr. O'Keefe's clothing?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
That were found in Mr. O'Keefe's what?
Mr. O'Keefe's shirts.
I don't remember that specifically.
1/6 of an inch? What are you talking about, Taylor?
1st, 2023. Is that correct?
Sorry, what's about that?
When you're talking about a declaration, you're referring to an affidavit that you filed with the court under pains and penalties of perjury in January of 2023.
I didn't think it was January, but however, there was only one, so whatever you have.
Now, at any point in time were you made aware that there were microscopic pieces of the defendant's tail light as small as 1/60th of an inch by 1/60th of an inch that were found in Mr. O'Keefe's clothing?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
That were found in Mr. O'Keefe's what?
Mr. O'Keefe's shirts.
I don't remember that specifically.
And that those pieces were then found to be consistent with the defendant's tail light.
Like I said, I don't remember that.
Like, to me, it was just really weird that when we had an expert that testified about that, we like barely heard it to the point where I was like, I think I remember hearing about that, but I'm not sure. And I feel like if I was Mr. Lally, I don't know, when he was talking to that witness, he really should have like made it really loud and clear. Hey, there were taillight pieces found in the clothing, but it just didn't happen. And I ended up questioning myself, I even fucking heard that or not.
Particular part.
Were you ever shown any material indicating that there was DNA from the defendant's tail light housing that was consistent with Mr. O'Keefe?
And the DNA thing, I mean, Karen Reed parked her car at John's house. They were together. So, like, I don't know. Them finding DNA on there, I was like, I would have been more interesting, would have been to find his blood and then proven that that blood belonged to John O'Keefe. But again, they swapped the car or swiped the car, whatever the fuck it was, and they didn't see any blood. No blood at all. It's like, yeah, his DNA's on there. I mean, that's not a huge surprise to me.
I asked about that myself, but I think the answer I got was no.
Now, were you ever told about a piece of human hair that was found on the right rear quarter panel near the area where there was a dent on the back right of the defendant's vehicle?
No, I don't remember that.
But then you weren't also told that that was then sent out for mitochondrial DNA testing, and it was consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe to a degree of 99.895%.
You're talking about a hair sample now. Yeah. No, I didn't have that.
Also, same thing with the hair. I mean, to me, I was just like, I don't know. She parks the car at his house. I don't know if the hair thing is that much of a big deal. I don't know. It could have been if there was blood attached to the hair.
Now, doctor, would you agree that in blunt impact injuries, the characteristics of a blunt object can then be transferred to the victim in the form of pattern abrasions that match the characteristics of that blunt object?
Yes.
Now, of the photographs
Oh, hey, ArcSight, what's going on? How are you doing today? Just saw you popping on in.
you reviewed photographs of the scene, photographs of the vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
You're aware that there were a number of different pieces of the defendant's taillight that were photographed as well. Did you ever see those?
I did, yes.
Do you recall seeing any piece of a clear plastic taillight piece that was recovered on January 29th, along with Mr. O'Keefe's sneaker that had dimpling on the outside of that clear piece of plastic?
Also, I did see that. I think it was like a circular, clear piece of plastic that had dimpling on it. But I think when I don't remember where that came from because I was trying to look to see where that piece would have been. Because didn't they put the taillight back together and then there was like a giant chunkling that was missing, right? It was like a clear piece. And I would have thought that piece that they found would have matched and gone in there. But I feel like they never, I don't know where they put that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just really confused because I did see a picture of the circle taillight piece with the dimples on it. And I'm like, what is that? Where did that come from? Or, oh, wait, would it be the bottom of the glass? No, he said plastic, right?
Do you recall seeing any piece of a clear plastic taillight piece that was recovered on January 29th?
Oh, he said clear plastic. Yeah, I was like, where did that come from? There was like a circle clear thing that had dimples on it.
Along with Mr. O'Keefe's sneaker that had dimpling on the outside of that clear piece of plastic?
I remember seeing the pictures of the glass fragments, but I don't remember any more.
Yeah, do you guys remember? It looked like this. Just wait. It was like It was like a circle, right? And it had like little like dimples like that. And I was like, what the heck is this piece? And I don't remember them shoving it back into the taillight when they constructed it back together. And I never knew what this piece was. And I was like, did they just forget to put it back in? I don't know. Oh, anyways, I was still wondering what the hell that was.
Specifics on that.
Do you know what a compression abrasion is?
What?
Compression abrasion.
Yeah, although it's not a term we use all the time, but however, yes.
And a compression abrasion can occur when there's direct pressure from a blunt object together with slight rubbing movements that produce skin and epidermal crushing. Is that correct?
Yeah, you have to have some lateral movement as well, though, to get an abrasion.
I don't know. I'm Googling compression abrasion and I'm not really getting anything coming up. So I don't know if it was a term that Lolly just made up or what, because the way that he responded, he made it seem like compression abrasion. I know what you're talking about, but it's not really a term that's really used. I don't know. I just Googled compression abrasion. I didn't get anything.
Now, when you were talking about prior autopsies that you've done involving pedestrian collisions, is it fair to say that most of those pedestrian collisions that you were doing autopsies on involved pedestrians being struck by the front of the vehicle?
Yeah, they're mostly the front. Mm-hmm.
Mostly it's the pedestrians who are crossing the street or standing in the street and then struck by the front of the vehicle, correct?
Yeah, I think they're all. I have actually done a couple of cases where children were hit by the back of a reversing vehicle. This was in the days before they had the rear videos on cars that they have now. But so those cases were impacts against the back of the vehicle. But most of the pedestrian cases, yeah, are, as you say, they're the front of the vehicle hitting the person.
Yeah, just briefly on that, as far as the defendant's vehicle itself, are you aware that there were rear backup cameras and a 300?
So I think that's important too, because he's saying that like a lot of the pedestrian collisions that I see is from the front of the vehicle. And I think that goes to other people that's testified as well. Like usually when they see collisions, it's at a front of vehicle, probably higher speed, right? Not necessarily when you're getting hit by the back of a car. And then also I was thinking like, well, how often do people get hit in parking lots? Probably often, right? When you're like backing up and then someone's walking by and you don't see them or you're not paying attention to your sensors or something like that. But at the same time, when you're backing up in the parking lot, you're not going 24 miles an hour. You're going pretty fucking slow. Maybe like 5 miles an hour, or maybe even less. I'm not really quite sure. But you're not going 24 miles an hour. Yeah.
360-degree overhead view from the back of her vehicle.
I remember reading that, Chance.
Now, understanding what you're talking about as far as a rear vehicle pedestrian collision, is that
Oh, I hope everything goes well with your doctor's appointment. I hope everything goes well.
typically sort of the wear on the vehicle? Let me ask you this first. When you are doing an autopsy in relation to a pedestrian collision, much of the information that you're gaining about that is what you receive from the investigating agency, whether it's the police or something like that, correct?
It varies a lot from one case to another. Sometimes you get no or virtually no information about the accident. Because some of these cases I've done, some of them were witnessed, some weren't. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So when they weren't witnessed, and when the person was just found later or sometime afterwards, you wouldn't have necessarily any. The vehicle would typically not be there. These would be hit and run type situations, and so in those cases, you wouldn't have all that kind of information. So it varies. It varies.
And understanding that it varies, but primarily what I'm saying is whatever information as far as the body comes in and you're going to conduct an autopsy, there would be some information from law enforcement or witness statements or something as to what type of death this is, as far as gunshot wound, stabbing, pedestrian collision, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. But like I said, in those on-witness cases of pedestrians, I might be given the information that it's probably a pedestrian fatality from a car.
And when it comes to pedestrian collisions, and most of which that you've seen are, again, from the front of the vehicle striking a pedestrian on the roadway, is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And are you familiar with what role sort of the center of mass of that person versus the center of mass of where they're struck plays in reference to their injuries?
Yeah, that can have a big effect.
I almost got run over at Trader Joe's parking lot in Silver Lake. Worst parking ever. Dude, Trader Joe's is always a fucking shit show. It's such a shit show. Small parking lots and like a lot of traffic in and out. Yeah.
And how the body reacts to the impact. Mm-hmm.
So most of the time when you're talking about sort of lower extremity injuries or pelvic fractures or things like that, that's in a frontal collision with the pedestrian, correct?
Most of them were, yeah. I mean, the ones that involved being backed over, when they were children, I can't remember the exact distribution of their injuries, except the vehicle went right over them. I do remember that. But anyway, the answer to your question, maybe I'm wandering in my mind, so can you ask me again?
I think you've answered it. So my next question, sir, is when it comes to the rear end collisions, primarily being children, you would agree with me that they have a lower center of mass than the 6'1", 200 something.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so as far as them being run over, they're going to get struck. They're probably going to fall.
And I love how honest he is. And I love how he's like not defensive. So he's like, yeah, you know, a lot of the stuff that I see are front collision. Yep, that's true. But the ones that I've seen that's with the rear collision, they're mostly children. And then Lolly's like really trying to get in on them, which, as you know, he should. And he's just like honest, you know?
fall to the ground and then the vehicle's going to go over, correct?
That's right, John.
And so how many autopsies have you conducted in regard to pedestrian collisions where they've been sideswiped by the back of the vehicle?
I can't remember.
Can you remember any?
Not off the top of my head, no.
And so if someone is struck by the right rear portion of a vehicle and then projected away from the vehicle based on speed, based on force, based on whatever, would you then expect to see those same type of pelvic fractures or lower extremity injuries that you talked about?
Isn't there, you know, when you're slipping, isn't there something in your car that shows up? Fuck, isn't it like, when you're slipping, right? Or am I thinking of something different? You know how there's like the traction control thing? Oh God, what am I thinking of? When your car is slipping, your car does like this mode where it prevents you from like further slipping and sliding even more. Am I thinking of the right thing? Is traction control something that you turn on and prevents that? Or is it something that your car automatically does it for you? Because I was thinking like, okay, well, if Karen Reed was backing up and she did slid a little bit, would there have been some information in her infotainment system that would have been like, oh, hey, like this is what happened to your car, right? Okay. Because I know Trooper Paul said that he tried to get information out of it and wasn't able to get like a good chunk of information. But I wonder if Trooper Paul just didn't know how to do it, or if he just like may have screwed up somehow, or if it truly was no information that he was able to retrieve. Because I know they talked about like the key start stop thing, and that's what I remembered.
Well, it depends on the exact position of the victim at the moment of impact. And of course, it could be a lot of different things. They could be, the victim could be facing the vehicle, they could be sideways on, they could have their back. But you're going to see bruising somewhere in that area, in one of those areas, either on the back, the side, whatever, or the front. I would expect to see bruising, significant bruising.
But as you testified earlier on direct, it's sort of dependent or variable depending on how the victim pedestrian interacted with the vehicle. Isn't that correct?
Yes, but I'd expect bruising for sure. I mean, whether you get fractures and so forth will depend on, or for that matter, internal injuries, depends on a variety of factors. But you're going to get bruising for sure.
You did see bruising on Mr. O'Keefe's right hand, correct?
Yes.
Oh my God, but the bruising was... So there were some bruising on John's hand, and I remember his own expert, the medical expert, the medical examiner said that there were 4 bruises on the back of his hand. She's not quite sure if, you know, maybe one of the bruising came from them trying to get like the IV in there. She's not really sure. It could have been possible, but I don't know. Because Trooper Paul thinks that John's glass and fist went into the back of the car, caused that dent, and then the headlights. I honestly don't even fucking know. Because if anything, I would imagine maybe the glass and the hand broke the tail light. But Trooper Paul said the contact was made where the dent was, which was, if you're looking at the back of the car, there was like a dent to the left of the head of the tail light. So then you would have to believe that the fist and the glass didn't make contact with the with the back of the car where the dent is. It was actually his arms. But again, with your arm not being bruised, been enough force to shatter the taillight like that. Like, oh God, there's just it just doesn't make sense to me.
It's a small bruising. It looked like 2, possibly 3, almost confluent or close together bruises.
Were you aware from the materials that you reviewed that Mr. O'Keefe was last seen sort of on video exiting from a bar at about 12:11 a.m. holding a cocktail glass in his right hand?
I vaguely remember that, yes.
Were you also aware that there were pieces of a cocktail glass with Mr. O'Keefe's DNA on it that were found right in the general vicinity where his body was found?
That I don't remember.
And I don't know if maybe I'm remembering correctly, but I thought the dent on the car, it looked like it was like front on dent, not like it was like dented from the side. But maybe I'm not remembering correctly.
For you, doctor, is it your testimony that those what you're terming as animal bites or scratches were they caused at one time or multiple times, or how many times are we talking about?
You mean on different occasions?
As far as in there are multiple abrasions as you've.
Because I think that's what the jury has to do, right? The jury has to try to make sense of what the prosecution is presenting them. And I'm sure after running through it after, a couple of times, they might just be like, you know what? It doesn't really fucking make sense. Let's just give up. I don't think the state's theory really holds, and then move on to, the next point. But it's really important to find out, okay, well, how was John hit? Because I'm sure the jury's thinking, okay, well, did she do it intentionally? If she did it intentionally, how would that happen? Okay, well, maybe it was an accident. Oh, well, if it was an accident, how would that have happened? Okay, maybe it wasn't even her at all, you know, right? Then we're done.
Harm them, and you're attributing them to an animal attack, correct?
I think that's the most likely explanation for these, yes.
And so my question is, sir, is that from the dog or the animal or whatever it is scratching Mr. O'Keefe once, more than once, based on what you observed in
Well, it's more than once. When I had the laser pointer here, I think I pointed to roughly, 1, 2, 3, 4 different areas. So it looks like, and you have, maybe there's an additional, the ones on the lower forearm, on the forearm, I should say, are harder to figure out. But it looks like 4, maybe 5 separate.
4 or 5 separate sort of swipes, whether they be with mouth or paws or whatever.
Yeah, that's correct.
Your arm would move when impacted, that the glass would have to move away. But your arm would move when impacted, that the glass would have moved away from the light. Wait, sorry. I don't know if I understand that, Gemini. Morton says, I don't think he was hit by a vehicle.
And so is it your testimony that it's not possible that Mr. O'Keefe received that from some part of the motor vehicle, or glass shattering, or shattering from a taillight, or any sort of metal pieces underneath contained within that taillight housing as far as his interaction with the vehicle?
They don't look remotely like that to me.
So it's not possible.
Hey, Hakuna, how are you doing today? How's it going? Yeah, it's 24 miles per hour. That's pretty fast in reverse. I've got this. I've been getting flies, mosquitoes sneaking into my house, and Cheryl does not like flies. He's like so scared of flies because they make the bzzz noise. Oh, sorry. And it drives him crazy.
Is that correct?
In my opinion, no.
You were asked about some questions with regard to the surface of the ground as far as dirt or grass. Are you familiar with what the weather was like at the time that Mr. O'Keefe, you testified earlier, you were familiar that he was found in snow, correct?
Yes.
Do you know what the temperature was like as far as, my question is this, sir. Understanding cushioning of grass and dirt under normal conditions, but if the ground is physically frozen based on the temperature of outside, would that impact as far as your understanding of the injuries to the back of Mr. O'Keefe?
So this is to go against what Ms. Little was saying, that like, oh, you know, if you were to land on the grass/dirt, would you have gotten a skull fracture that was this bad? And he's like, no, I don't expect that, because there would have been some cushioning. And then also he remembers that there was some snow, which could add further cushioning, right, when you're landing. And I guess Lolly's trying to say, well, if it was frozen, could have it caused this injury?
No, I mean, even if there was a small coating of ice, I wouldn't change my opinion based on that, no.
I'm not talking about ice, sir. What I'm talking about is the ground itself being physically frozen based on the temperatures outside.
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, as far as the hard surface that you're talking about, would that include asphalt pavement?
Yes, it could.
And as far as those injuries, the speed, if Mr. O'Keefe was struck by a vehicle and was projected away from that vehicle and then struck his head on the ground, would that be sufficient force, in your opinion, to cause a skull fracture on the back of his head?
If all that happened, yes, and onto asphalt.
He said, if all that happened. Listen to it again.
Pavement.
Yes, it could.
And as far as those injuries, the speed, if Mr. O'Keefe was struck by a vehicle and was projected away from that vehicle and then struck his head on the ground, would that be sufficient force, in your opinion, to cause a skull fracture on the back of his head?
If all that happened, yes, and onto asphalt or something like that.
And again, a lot of us have a hard time believing John would have been projectiled into the air, but then not get any bruising. I don't know. That to me is just kind of, it's just really weird.
Like asphalt, yes, if that's indeed what happened. But like for other reasons, I don't think that is what happened.
Now, you testified, or you asked some questions about your opinion as to, or consistency with the physical altercation, is that right?
Yes.
And the sort of swelling in Mr. O'Keefe's eyes, as far as the ecchymosis is concerned there, that was related to the brain injury, is that your understanding?
Well, the skull injury rather than the brain.
Skull injury, which leads to the bleeding of the brain, which then leads to the swelling of the eye. Right?
Well, yeah, but
And this is Lolly trying to address people's theory that like, oh, John had 2 black eyes because he got punched in the face, and that's the result of that. So the medical examiner said that the reason why he had raccoon eyes was because of the skull fracture, and then it kind of like spread throughout and caused that that bruising effect, I guess, that swelling in the eyes. And I think he agreed to that as well. He said that like, oh, it could have been, you know, from that, and you know, because there was damage on, I think he said like there was like some side damages to his brain, like fractures possibly. I mean, it could look like a physical altercation as well. If I remember that right.
the skull injury rather than the brain.
Skull injury, which leads to the bleeding of the brain, which then leads to the swelling of the eye. Right?
Well, yeah, but no, I mean, let's be clear about this. I mentioned the fractures earlier on that came from the back and went all the way towards the front of the skull, including what are called the orbital plates, which are the bones the parts of the frontal bone that are right over the eye sockets. And the bone there is very delicate. It's the thinnest part of the skull.
Yeah, and it seems like he's agreeing exactly with what the medical examiner is saying.
Anyway, the photographs and the autopsy report clearly show that the fracture involved that on each side, both orbital plates, in other words. And it's that fracture, it's not the brain itself, but it's that fracture which leads to the bleeding that causes the black eyes, if you want to call them that way.
Oh, I don't know if the medical examiner said that there was fractures in like the orbital area. I thought she said it was like from the back and then like kind of like spread to like the side.
And as far as what your review of medical records, your review of the autopsy report, photographs, things like that, you observed nothing as far as fractures to Mr. O'Keefe's eye sockets, correct?
Well, the orbital plates, in a sense, are part of the eye sockets, but they're the roof.
Were there any fractures to the orbital bones?
There were no fractures that appeared to be coming from the front, no.
As far as the sclera, was there any broken blood vessels or anything that you observed in either the notes or the reports or the photographs or anything else that you saw?
Broken blood vessels were?
The sclera.
Huh?
Sclera of the eyes? You know what that is?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you said, yeah. No, as far as I know, the eyes were clear, yeah. The eyes themselves were clear, yeah.
Now, as far as the minor injuries that you were talking about, as far as the eyelid or the nose, as far as those minor lacerations you were talking about, there was no bruising around any of those lacerations, correct?
The eyelid laceration, don't forget, is in the same area where you have the other injury, and it's a little bit hard to figure out whether how much hemorrhage, how much of that black eye could even be from related to the laceration, because you've got two possible explanations for the black eyes. One is the skull fracture I've already mentioned, but that doesn't rule out his getting an impact as well on the front, but there's no way to separate them.
As far as around those minor lacerations that you're talking about, you didn't observe or see any record of any bruising or any broken bones in those areas whatsoever?
No, well, the main one that I was relating to when I...
Trooper's Paul's theory was John was possibly hit and then like flew and then landed on the back of his head, right? Was he also open to a second possibility that John could have hit his head on maybe like the asphalt or the curb and then maybe at some point was still kind of like conscious and crawled his way to the grass? I don't know if I remember that part. Because I definitely remember the flying thing. But I don't remember if he was also open to a second possibility that like the other thing could have happened as well.
Spoke about the altercation question was the laceration on the eyelid. That's not related to the head injury that we've been discussing. So it's a separate injury, and it is from some kind of blow to the front.
Minor lacerations that you observe, would they be consistent with being struck by broken pieces of glass or broken pieces of broken sharp pieces of plastic?
If it was indeed a laceration, as it was described, then no, because lacerations by definition, although this is a term that's often misused, by the way, even by some doctors, but a laceration by definition is an open wound caused by blunt force, not sharp.
So blunt force, as far as what I'm asking is it possible that the lacerations to his face were caused by a blunt object that then shattered and caused the lacerations to his face?
I find that hard to imagine. I find that very hard to even conceive of.
Because wouldn't that just change the definition? That if it was blunt and then something happened to it and it became sharp, I don't know if that would still be considered a laceration because now it's like a sharp object, right?
So it's not conceivable. Is that what you're saying?
To me, no.
And from your review of whatever reports and medical
Wait, so I guess I'm a little confused. So is the other... What is Lolly trying to get at here? So we're talking about the laceration in the back of the skull, and then Lolly's saying like it could have been caused by a blunt object that became sharp. Is he talking about the tail light, or is he talking about the glass? But why are we talking about that with the back of the skull? Or am I getting confused?
And caused the lacerations to his face. Lacerations to his face were caused by blunt force, as far as when
It's not sharp.
So blunt force, as far as what I'm asking is it possible that the laceration
Let me go back.
That we've been discussing. So it's a separate injury, and it is from some kind of blow to the front.
minor lacerations that you observe, would they be consistent with being struck by broken pieces of glass or broken pieces of broken sharp pieces of plastic?
If it was indeed a laceration, as it was described,
Oh, I think he's talking about the front of his face, not the back.
that's not related to the head injury that we've been discussing. So it's a separate injury, and it is from some kind
I
of...
think they're talking about the eyelid injury. So there was like a eyelid laceration. It looked like a scratch to me. It was like on the left side of his eyelid.
blow to the front.
Minor lacerations that you observe, would they be consistent with being struck by broken pieces of glass or broken pieces of broken sharp pieces of plastic?
If it was indeed a laceration, as it was described, then no, because lacerations by definition, although this is a term that's often misused, by the way, even by some doctors, but a laceration by definition is an open wound caused by blunt force.
Well, even so, even if there was like a laceration on his eye, how would that have happened? Would the taillight have shattered and flung and maybe hit his eye? Is that what Lolly is saying? Or does Lolly think that John's face was also low enough to where his arms were? That would cause more confusion for me, honestly, if I was the jury.
not sharp.
So blunt force, as far as what I'm asking is it possible that the lacerations to his face were caused by a blunt object that then shattered and caused the lacerations to his face?
No.
I find that hard to imagine. I find that very hard to even conceive of.
So it's not conceivable, is that what you're saying?
To me, no.
And from your review of whatever reports and medical records and everything else, what, if anything, did you see? Or did you see anything that had to do with an animal being present on scene or an animal being near Mr. O'Keefe's body or Mr. O'Keefe being inside the house?
I don't know. I mean, but I heard there was an animal somewhere around the place, a dog. I think you mentioned the dog earlier.
So somewhere around the place, but no evidence that you've seen that animal interacted with Mr. O'Keefe in any way?
No, I wasn't there, obviously, and all I can say is what I've already said, but I don't know any more than that.
I know you weren't there. What I'm saying is from the material that you reviewed, was there any indication or any evidence of that animal ever being near, close to, or interacting in any way with Mr. O'Keefe?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I have nothing further.
Little?
Thank you. Your Honor, if I may approach.
Sure.
Thank you.
Show Mr. Lally.
Dr. Sheridan, if you could just take a look at that photograph. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I saw the photograph before.
Can you describe that photograph to the jury?
It shows the decedent's knees taken from the right side, but you can see both knees.
Your Honor, permission to mark this and then publish it.
Mark it. Put it into evidence. Okay, is there any objection, Mr. Lally?
No, yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Sheridan, you were asked on cross-examination about injury to Mr. O'Keefe's knee. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
Is this the injury
What is that?
that you were testifying about earlier?
Yes.
I think there's like some bruise here, but that looks like maybe a mole.
This has been mentioned before. It's an abrasion.
And that's the extent of the injury.
Or is that the abrasion? I can't tell because they're putting the ruler next to this, so maybe they're pointing this out. I don't know. I don't even know what I'm looking at here, to be honest.
Mr. O'Keefe's.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, in that area. Yeah.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, let me just take a screenshot of this. I honestly, if I was looking at this, I'd be like, I don't really see anything here, but okay. All right, so just to recap that. So some wins for Lolly, and then Lolly's like, well, obviously John O'Keefe's not a child, right? So that would kind of stand out to me. But honestly, what really stands out to me if I was a jury, because all the other things that I listed were just like, okay, like, okay, they seem important. But what's really important and what really would stand out to me is the bruising thing. The bruising that would really stand out to me. Because this expert has said many times, like, oh, you would expect to see bruising, maybe even fractures, right? Depending on how bad it was. But, all right, next witness. I'm excited for this
All right,
next
Dr.
witness.
Sheridan, you are all set, sir.
I liked
Well,
his
thank you.
testimony
Thank
too,
you.
though. I feel like, I don't know, these experts are just giving us way more clarity than what the state has given us. Oh yeah, and I Kiki says everything the troopers touched or said is not credible to me. And I would probably feel like the jury might feel the same way. Like, okay, well, anything that Proctor or maybe some of his team members have touched, I don't know if I believe it. It seems a little bit shady. I'm sure there are some people that think the same. All right, I just want to get his name. We're gonna go through we're just gonna speed through his credentials, but he works for the ARCCA. They do like crash. Him specifically is crash reconstructionist, and yeah, I just want to get his name on here. I think it's Michael Wolf.
You sound like you have to give the court and jury in the case now and hearing the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes.
All right, Mr. Jackson, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, could you state your full name and spell your last name for us, please?
Daniel Michael Wolfe, last name spelled W-O-L-F-E.
Dr. Wolfe, what do you do for a living?
I am the Director of Accident
That was close. Daniel Michael Wolf. I was close. I said Michael Wolf.
Reconstruction at a company known as ARCA, A-R-C-C-A.
And what is ARCA exactly?
So ARCA is a forensic engineering consulting firm. We have a variety of disciplines that include human factors, biomechanics, crashworthiness, accident reconstruction, just to name a few.
Based on your title, it sounds like you...
And they were hired by the FBI. And the defense is like, oh, we like what you said in the federal grand jury, so we're going to use you in our trial as an expert.
Director of the entire accident reconstruction format for ARCA, correct?
That is correct.
What sort of contracts does ARCA routinely engage in?
So we do a lot of work in civil litigation. So we work with insurance carriers, law firms, but we also consult with and do projects with the federal government as well as the National Hockey League on player safety. So we're involved in a number of research projects as well.
Is there other clientele that seeks out ARCA for?
Hey, the show. Thank you so much for the tier 1 sub. I really appreciate that. Oh, Vertros. Wait, you're here. Hi. Hydration. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's get some hydration. Okay, so I'm just gonna go straight into the meat of his testimony.
As it relates to the kinematics and the interaction between been paid by the defense?
You have not paid us anything, no.
And you don't work for us?
That's correct.
As a matter
And that's a good bonus point for them.
of fact, I've never asked you specific questions about your testing before today.
That is correct.
All right, bonus points right there.
OCME dispatch removal report, photographs of the incident location, videos of the incident location, photographs of the 2021 Lexus LX570, photographs of recovered evidence, crash data retrieval report from the 2021 Lexus 570, report of autopsy, and autopsy photographs.
Based on these data that you were provided, were you able to satisfactorily, to your mind, satisfactorily engage in the consultation that you were hired to do?
Yes.
And come up with some opinions and conclusions based on scientific certainty?
Yes.
Did you review scene photographs of the alleged incident?
Yes, sir.
What information were you able to glean or gather from your review of the photographs, from the scene specifically?
So from those photographs, I was able to identify there was fragments of transparent red, clear plastic. There also appeared to be pieces of chrome and black plastic. I also observed what appeared to be glass fragments along with a black drinking straw.
Did you also review some videos?
Yes.
That was out at the scene, maybe a leaf blower?
Correct. It appeared to be daytime, yes.
Yes, let's remind the jury about the leaf blower.
Did you note about the photography at the scene of the items that were being photographed?
They sucked.
Well, I think one thing that comes to mind is it was a little bit difficult to follow the evidence, so to speak. So typically,
Yeah, the pictures were so bad. It was like some weird filter that they had on. I don't know what it was. And sometimes when they took pictures, there was no measurement placed right next to it. So I was like, okay, all right.
when I go out and do an inspection, especially of a fresh incident, let's say I've got a debris field or I've got tire marks, what I like to do is kind of step into the scene, if you will, where you take global perspective shots and then you step into a specific piece of evidence so that you can, at a later point in time, identify where that evidence is. I noted that in a lot of these photographs, I didn't see a whole lot of that stepping in. It was essentially just zoomed right into where that evidence is, but not really having a great understanding of where was it relative to all the other evidence.
Or when it got there?
Correct.
Yeah, they would take a picture of like a zoomed in of an evidence and then even more zoomed in of that evidence. But in terms of like where the fuck was this found, it was kind of hard to see. It wasn't until was it Trooper Paul or someone had it like plotted sort of on the map. But it was like many testimonies later, like I don't know, days, weeks later.
Based on your review of all the materials that you described for the court, did you get an understanding of what the Commonwealth's theory of the case is, specifically Mr. O'Keefe was struck by the Lexus SUV?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you come to understand that the allegations before the court were that Mr. O'Keefe was struck by the vehicle?
Objection.
Sustained. Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
I think we're gonna have a couple
Did you perform an
sustains.
accident reconstruction specifically focused on determining whether or not damage to the Lexus was consistent with hitting Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, I think that's a fair characterization.
And reversing that, was your accident reconstruction also focused on whether or not the injuries to Mr. O'Keefe were the result of being hit by a vehicle?
Yes.
Okay. During your analysis, did you note the damage to the vehicle?
Yes, sir.
Describe that, please.
So the primary damage was to the right taillight. It appeared to be fractured with the majority of the lens cover, so that clear and red plastic covering missing from it. In addition to that, if you're looking at the back of the vehicle, to the left of that, in the area above there's also another tail lamp assembly on the lift gate. So above that assembly, there was a small dent along with some paint chips on the bumper, more so on the wraparound section as it kind of curves around to the right side of the vehicle. There appeared to be some superficial scratches as well in that area.
Was there any other damage or deformation that you were able to glean from your review, the photogrammetry, damage to the Lexus, the bumpers, the panels, the quarter panel, the sheet metal, anything like that?
No, the rest was remarkably intact.
Is it common in vehicle-pedestrian collisions that there's some sort of bumper displacement and or sheet metal deformation that's concomitant to that?
Absolutely. Assuming a pedestrian is positioned in a normal upright position, you certainly would expect to see damage to the bumper. In a lot of cases, what happens is, the bumper is just clipped on. So again, the force of that impact will oftentimes cause the bumper to kind of become unmounted or unclipped. You certainly could see deformation to body paneling, such as the lift gate or the quarter panel as well.
Is that especially true at higher speeds, meaning above 15 miles per hour or so?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Was there any apparent damage to the Lexus that appeared consistent with any kind of pedestrian interaction that you saw?
No, it was really confined to just the taillight, a very isolated portion of the vehicle.
Yeah, because it's weird because you would expect there to be bumper damage.
During your review and your investigation, did you note information concerning items that were supposedly found on the bumper?
Yes.
What was that?
I believe it was noted there was 2 apparent glass fragments located on the top bumper cover.
What's the significance of the presence of those items or the lack of materiality of those items in your view?
Well, again, I think it's going back to the scene evidence. Again, we knew that there was glass fragments what appeared to be from a drinking glass at the scene of the alleged incident.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any glass consistent with the glass that was supposedly found on the bumper in the taillight housing, the taillight mechanism, anything from the car, the Lexus, that would account for that glass?
Okay, I think I understand. So the taillight itself is not comprised of any glass. It is all plastic. So that damage, or I should say that glass on the top bumper cover could not have come from the right taillight.
Now, based on your review of the information that was provided to you.
And I think Triple Paul said the same thing too, that the taillight was all plastic. And I think even, did they ask about the light bulbs as well? From what I've heard, it was like, oh, anything in the interior would have been not been the glass that was found in the bumper. So he also said that.
Did you undertake any testing of that vehicle? I'm sorry, any testing concerning the damage to the vehicle?
Yes, sir.
All right, can you describe what that testing was?
So we performed, again, this is with Dr. Rentschler and I working together on this again. We performed projectile testing to the tail lamp with a drinking glass as well as a hybrid head form.
Let's take those one at a time. How would you describe the drinking glass test?
Certainly. So again, from our review of the evidence, we knew that we had.
And honestly, that's what I would expect a Trooper Paul to be doing. Like, hey, let's just make sure it could have been other ways that the taillight was damaged. So I guess he's going to check to see, okay, is it possible that John may have threw the drink at the taillight and that's how it shattered?
At an isolated portion of damage to Lexus confined to the taillight. So we know that we're dealing with potentially a small object that could have created that. Looking at, again, the evidence in terms of the scene photographs, we know that we have a damaged drinking glass at the scene in the vicinity of the fragments of the taillight. So the theory that Dr. Rentschler and I put forward is potentially an individual threw this drinking glass at the back of the Lexus, causing the taillight to fracture.
I'm going to interrupt you right there. You and Dr. Rentschler formed that theory and wanted to test that theory, correct?
Yes.
You were not told that theory by the defense because you've never met us?
Correct.
You were not told that theory by the Commonwealth? You've never met them, correct?
Correct.
Your theory was the product of simply having some facts extant in the data, that a broken drinking glass, a broken taillight, let's put them together and figure out if the drinking glass could be responsible for the taillight, vice versa.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and genuinely being curious and exploring other theories.
That was your determination of, well, we were given instructions to reconstruct this, let's look at every single angle, correct?
Yes.
Absolutely. And I will note, as part of the engagement with the entity that retained us, we were asked not to do any outside research or investigation of the case. It was to be based solely on the evidence that we were provided. Okay.
As a matter of fact, and importantly, while you were doing your testing, had you ever even heard of the Karen Reed case?
No.
So getting back to that testing, and I interrupted your flow, you were looking at whether or not the glass could have produced the damage to the rear taillight that you saw, correct?
Correct.
And what did you do in furtherance of making a determination about whether or not that was possible?
Certainly. So myself and one of our lab technicians at ARCA, we designed and developed a pressurized air cannon. So it was capable of firing a projectile such as a drinking glass at the taillight. So it essentially, you think of it kind of as a giant cannon, but it had a barrel, and then there was a valve that would open rapidly, and directly behind that was a pressurized vessel. And depending on the pressure, the PSI of that vessel would determine essentially the speed at which that glass would be projected into the taillight.
So you literally built a cannon?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
He's so proud of his work.
Cool job. Tell me what the results of your testing was with this pneumatic cannon that would fire the drinking glass.
Certainly. So we performed 2 different tests in terms of speeds. The target speeds were 30 and 40 miles per hour.
Why was that?
Well, so with consultation with Dr. Rentschler, he indicated that is a reasonable speed at which an adult male or an individual, for that matter, could throw a drinking glass at the taillight.
Had anybody up to that point, told you any specific, let me see if I can rephrase that. Had anybody indicated that there was any evidence whatsoever that John O'Keefe had thrown a drinking glass at the taillight?
No.
Was this another example of you and Dr. Rentschler?
And this is a good way to drill into the jury's mind. They're like, hey, the defense didn't tell you to do X, Y, and Z. You guys did this on your own.
Team just exploring sort of every possibility and working a little bit in the blind.
Objection.
Sustained.
What was the reason that you decided, or you and your team decided, that you wanted to approximate how a grown man could throw a glass in a tail?
And this is what I wanted to hear from the state's witness, but we just didn't get that. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, it could be this. All right, okay. And then cross-examination destroyed, you know?
Well, I think we wanted to have an understanding.
These are the type of witnesses that we're used to seeing in other trials. Like, oh, it's just so satisfying to just have a good expert witness go up there and testify. All right.
Objection.
Sustained.
What was the reason that you decided, or you and your team decided, that you wanted to approximate how a grown man could throw a glass in a taillight?
Well, I think we wanted to have an understanding is when a projectile such as a drinking glass interacted with the taillight, would we get damage on the test taillight that was consistent with that of the subject taillight?
Understood. So based on your theory, were you able to approximate the damage on the taillight?
Yes.
Describe that for us.
So as I mentioned, we ran 2 tests. The target speeds were at 30 and 40 miles per hour. And there was a little bit of variability in terms of what our target was and what we actually achieved. So the achieved speeds were at 31 miles per hour and 37 miles per hour. So there's just depending on how the glass leaves the barrel and some of the rotation can affect some of the speed, or ultimately the end result speed to that. So what I will say, though, is that with the 37 mile per hour projectile into the taillight, we noted and observed that there was damage that was consistent with that of the subject tail lamp, and that the test tail lamp had the majority of the outer lens fractured and missing, broken into pieces, as well as some underlying damage.
And this is where I'm thinking, like, if I was a jury and he's saying that, like, okay, like throwing it at 37 miles per hour is consistent with the damage they found in the taillight. He hasn't really mentioned, though, if the taillight was the exact car taillight. I'm assuming maybe, but I don't know. That to me would be kind of like floating in my head. But he did say that it's consistent with the taillight damage. And I'm thinking, okay, so what if Karen and John pulled up to 34 Fairview, got into argument to the point where John got out of the vehicle, and then maybe he threw his drinking glass at the taillight and it shattered the taillight. And then Karen Reed backed up in a way where it didn't hit John, but the taillight scraped his arm somehow. Right? And that's where that's as a jury, that's all that I could imagine in my head. Now, as to how did he fall back, got that damage in the back of his head. The state honestly really hasn't provided anything to me that just seems to make sense, especially saying that they have expert witnesses and the defense as well, saying that, like, oh, if John had injuries to the back of his head, he would have been rendered unconscious, right? So I could get up to the part where, okay, so maybe she did back up and scraped his arm with the taillight, but everything else after that, not quite sure if I can get behind that. Sorry, not sure. I'm pretty fucking sure I'm not going to be able to get behind the state's theory, everything happening after that, because they just didn't do a good job at proving that, in my opinion.
Damage to some of the internal components as well.
Are you saying, well, let me ask you a different question. You were able to replicate the damage to the taillight using a pneumatic cannon firing the glass at 37 miles an hour directly.
Yeah, so, oh, gosh. The glass that they found on the bumper. Oh God, I have it in my notes somewhere. Because wasn't there an issue with one of the piece or something like that? It was like the glass matched the glass found at the scene. The glass in the bumper matched the glass pieces that was found at the scene, but maybe didn't match the glass that was the cocktail glass, right? Am I remembering that correctly? I'll have to rely on closing arguments for the attorneys to joggle my memory on that one.
Correct?
Correct.
All right. And that would also shatter the glass too, correct?
Correct.
John would have had to throw in a different glass, which is possible, I suppose. I mean, okay, so if you want to explore that theory, if John had a different glass with him, I mean, we know that Karen had a glass that she took from, because of the surveillance footage, it looks like she took a glass that she was drinking at C.F. McCarthy and brought it to the waterfall. I don't remember seeing footage of Karen Reed leaving. Is it possible she could have snuck a drinking glass as she was leaving the waterfall without having any witnesses see it? Or maybe she stuck it in her jacket? We know John O'Keefe definitely took one. So is it possible that they both could have taken the glass from the bar and then John was drinking from both of them when they were in the car arguing, took both of the drinking glass out, chucked one at the car, and that's why it didn't match the one that he stole from the waterfall? I don't know. That's like... that you saw my face, right? My face is like contorted as fuck when I'm thinking about that theory. Like, possible, but I mean, I'm not going to go down that route as a jury because the state hasn't mentioned anything like that, right? My face, the more I dug deeper into it, the more my face was getting all twisted up. So, I mean, I'm just going to go by with what the state is presenting us, right? If we want to go beyond the state stuff, like, it's fun to explore those avenues, but sticking to what the state has said, they haven't mentioned that at all. It seems like they, for some reason, are are only entertaining the glass that John O'Keefe was drinking that he stole from the waterfall being the one that was with him when he was struck by Karen Reed's car. But I don't know. I feel like Lolly he should have an issue with the pieces on the bumper not matching the drinking glass, unless there was another, I don't know, maybe in the car there was like a glass bottle drink or something. I don't know. I do not know. But, oh gosh. Didn't they say that there was only 2 pieces and then one of the pieces didn't match? Or was it all of them didn't match? I had to listen to closing arguments. I don't remember.
Did you do any testing?
Inside Edition is great proof that she's guilty. What do they have, Kimmy? Okay, if you want to go there, that is even possible a rock glass would break the tail light. I mean, I don't know what kind of glass he used, but I think he said I think he said it was a rock glass. I mean, if they're firing it out of the cannon, then yeah, I mean, if it happened. Hi, Kiki. He said 37 miles per hour was consistent with the taillight being broken with the way that they saw it on Karen Reed's car.
About whether or not that damage to the taillight could be produced by a person simply holding a glass and being hit by the car driving in reverse.
We didn't do any testing of that, and primarily because, again, if we're looking at the arm and its total length, right, we only have a narrow damage pattern, which on the taillight, if you think about where where it meets the lift gate into where it starts to wrap around to the side of the vehicle, it's only about 6.5 inches in width.
All right. When you fired the glass into the taillight,
Oh, wait, hold on. I feel like, because remember, the taillight isn't just on the back of the car. It wraps around to the right side. Let me go back a little bit.
Where where it meets the lift gate, primarily because
hit to the taillight could be produced by a person simply holding a glass and being hit by the car driving in reverse.
Oh, okay. So could the taillight be hit by someone holding a drink and the car is in reverse? Car is in reverse. Okay. And that's why he's talking about how the taillight wraps around to the right side.
we didn't do any testing of that, and primarily because, again, if we're looking at the arm and its total length, right, we only have a narrow damage pattern, which on the taillight, if you think about where where it meets the lift gate into where it starts to wrap around to the side of the vehicle, it's only about 6.5 inches in width.
All right. When you fired the glass into the taillight was static. In other words, it was not going to move. It was immovable at that point, correct?
Correct.
All right. So the glass is hurling through the air at 37 miles an hour and hits the static object that's resisting, and that smash is what produced ultimately the taillight damage that you were able to replicate. Is that right?
Yes.
If a person were holding in his hand the glass and the taillight were to hit that hand, the hand would not remain static, correct?
Objection.
Sustained. Ask you to flip into objection.
If the taillight were to
Hi, Sherry. How are you doing today? I hope you had a good time at the wedding. Yeah, it was fun. I was DD, and it was fun. It was pretty cool. I left a little bit early though, because I didn't want to leave Cheryl here by himself. But yeah, it was really fun. Had a good time. Food, best wedding food ever. It was so good. It wasn't like your traditional salad, and then you get like a meat plate, right? I think it was like Chinese food, like Chinese Vietnamese fusion or something. It was so, so good. We started off with like this like cold chicken salad. Not like your traditional salad. It's like a very like Vietnamese salad that was like drenched in some sauce. Oh, it was so fucking good with some crispy stuff on top. We had like pieces of beef tenderloin, I think, that was like stir fried. We had fried fish, like a whole ass fried fish. We had the walnut shrimp thing. I don't know what you call it. The shrimp thing where it's like walnuts in it. It was like giant prawns though. Oh, they were so fucking good. And lobster. Oh, it was so fucking good. Those are my favorite type of wedding food, where it's just real food. Oh, so good. I would say it rivals my other friend's wedding. My friend had a wedding in Hawaii where she had Filipino and Hawaiian food. Oh my God, it was so good. Yeah, we're on YouTube right now. I want to see the cannon. Well, absolutely is awesome. Isn't the best test to figure out if he's not throwing it away, the cannon shoots it. I don't know. I think they're just focusing on the speed at which the drinking glass would have been launched at, and then the speed, and then probably like whether or not if a glass drink was thrown at this speed could have shattered a taillight, right? I guess what you're not really taking into consideration is like because John O'Keefe was also like really fucking drunk. I think actually, did they find out that he was really drunk? I think so because I think they did do they did draw his blood. And weren't they able to get something from like the back of his eye as well? I think they were able to find out that he was really drunk. I mean, I also believe that Karen was also really drunk as well. But I mean, could a drunk person be throwing a glass that fast, or would it be a little more sloppy and like a little bit more slower? I don't know. Yeah, it was so good. It was so good. It was delicious.
The taillight would make contact with a person holding a glass.
No lumpia. No, they're not Filipino. My Filipino friend had lumpia at the wedding though. She had lumpia. She had lechon. She had purple ube potato thing. I don't know. It was so fucking good. Oh God, now I'm getting hungry.
Sustained. Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
If the taillight were the taillight would make contact with a person holding a glass, would that replicate what you did in terms of you firing a glass into the taillight? In other words, are they apples and apples?
No, I don't think it would be the same.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, again, the damage to the back of the Lexus, again, is confined to just that, roughly, again, we're talking about the taillight itself, that 6.5-inch section in width.
Right.
So it's inconsistent with the total length of the arm, and certainly from discussion with Dr. Rentschler, inconsistent with the injuries to the arm.
So given everything in your investigation was revealed concerning this testing, are you saying that the taillight was damaged by John O'Keefe holding a drinking glass that was hit by an SUV?
Objection.
Sustained.
In all the information that you provided, you would not provide anything that suggested that John O'Keefe threw a glass at the taillight. Right?
Objection.
Sustained.
Your approach.
Yeah, it's just, yes.
I would hate to be the jury. My God, if I was a jury, I would need a vacation, okay, for all this mental gymnastics that I've probably been doing the past 7 weeks, plus. Oh.
If any, were you provided that suggested that John O'Keefe threw a glass at the taillight?
No information.
What information, if any, were you provided that suggested that John O'Keefe may have had a pneumatic cannon with him? Is that right?
I'm not aware of any information regarding that.
All right. You also tell us about that drug testing.
Certainly. So, again, through discussion with Dr. Rentschler, it was my understanding that Mr. O'Keefe had a skull fracture on the back of his head. So we wanted to do an evaluation of the interaction between the back of a head. In this case, we used again, talking about that instrumented dummy again, we used the instrumented hybrid head form to perform a drop test to evaluate the forces of an interaction between a taillight from the Lexus and the human head.
What height did you choose to perform this drop test?
7.5 feet.
Why did you choose that height?
Well, if you calculate it through physics and the acceleration due to gravity, that would equate to an impact speed of 15 miles per hour at that height.
And what was the significance of 15 miles per hour?
Well, that was essentially kind of a starting point for us, if you will. So I will tell you that in reverse, 15 miles an hour is fast. I don't know if you've ever looked at your speedometer when you're pulling into your driveway, reversing into a parking stall. Most people probably don't go more than 5 miles an hour or so. So 15 miles an hour in reverse is fast, especially when we're talking about, it's my understanding it was nighttime.
No, I didn't participate in the flower bouquet thing. I wanted to, but my friend's like, oh, we're married, we shouldn't. I'm like, fine. But I will say, the flower bouquet catch, it was aggressive, okay? The woman who caught it, she was aggressive as fuck. And I want to give her kudos for that. Because I told you guys, I went to my friend's wedding and she threw the flower bouquet. She was like, everyone went up there, even married people, right? So she threw the flower bouquet, but no one reached for the bouquet. They just stood there waiting for it to land in their hands. I'm like, that's so stupid. Reach for it. Fight for it. Ah! And that's what I did. And then when I caught it, I realized, oh shit, I'm like the only person that jumped up in the air to reach for it. So I handed it to my friend who was standing next to me because I was like, okay, so these are a group of people that are not aggressive and let me chill the fuck out. Because I'm naturally an aggressive person.
There was winter conditions, potentially wet or icy roads. So
aggressive
again, that
and
speed
competitive, okay? Competitive!
is going to be what I would say on the high end for going in reverse. So also in addition to with respect to kind of just the nature of that speed, it's my understanding through discussion with Dr. Rentschler that at 15 miles an hour, you start to see significant injuries to the human body when it makes contact with a vehicle. And I think one last point is that we needed to pick a speed where, again, this is kind of just us brainstorming, where we would have damage to the taillight, right? It would fracture it, but it wouldn't completely obliterate it. So we knew if we chose a speed, for instance, of 40 miles an hour, we know we're going to completely essentially explode the taillight. But if we do 1 mile an hour, we may not do anything to it, right? So we kind of had to pick a middle ground to again, cause damage to the taillight.
What was your conclusion following that testing? What was your conclusion with regard to whether or not it was consistent or inconsistent with the damage to the truck the taillight was consistent.
Now, this isn't the state's theory. They don't think that John O'Keefe was struck by the vehicle in the back of the head. But wouldn't it have been nice for Trooper Paul to also explore that just in case, because you do know that there's an injury in the back of the head? Wouldn't it have been nice to just explore it just cause? Wouldn't it have been nice to just explore, oh, maybe a glass was thrown in the taillight?
Or inconsistent with making contact with John O'Keefe's head at or above 15 miles an hour.
So strictly speaking, to a damage perspective, the 15-mile-an-hour interaction between the hybrid head form and the test tail lamp produced significantly more damage than that of the subject vehicle. So that indicates that, again, the damage on the subject tail light was less than that of the test tail light.
So if I were to ask you whether or not there would be more or less damage to the taillight if you increase the speed to 24 miles an hour, what's your conclusion?
Well, you're talking about significantly more kinetic energy. So if you just think about it from, again, a kinetic energy standpoint, kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 times the mass. It's
funny because when he's nerding out on the stand, he's got a little smile, because oh yes, I can talk about this. I feel like he's just so excited to talk about this. Am I getting married next, or are you ready? Well, I mean, I gave the flower to my friend, so maybe she'll get married next. But no, I'm already married. We just didn't do a wedding or anything like that because I think weddings are a waste of money. But I already did all the paperwork and all the stuff a couple years back.
And the velocity squared. So if you're squaring that velocity and you're going from 15 up to 24 miles per hour, you're going to get a significant amount of more energy associated with it.
Oh, well, the reason why he did 15 was because he thinks 15 is already a pretty high speed to be backed up into by a vehicle. And he said earlier, if you were backed into at 24 miles per hour, then, well, the damage would be pretty extensive. Here, I'll rewind it back a little bit.
Well, you're talking about significantly more kinetic energy. So if you just think about it from, again, a kinetic energy standpoint, kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 times the mass and the velocity squared. So if you're squaring that velocity and you're going from 15 up to 24 miles per hour, you're going to get a significant amount of more energy associated with that. Probably, I can pull up my calculator, but you're probably looking at 2.5 more.
Pull up the calculator, do it!
times energy than the 15-mile-an-hour test.
Which means 2.5 more times the damage to the taillight?
Certainly.
Which you did not see in your review of the materials, correct?
Correct.
So what is your opinion or conclusion as to whether or not the damage to the taillight was caused by striking John O'Keefe's head?
From a damage standpoint, it was inconsistent.
I want to shift gears back to the injuries that you saw concerning Mr. O'Keefe's arm, his right arm. During the course of your investigation, did you look at photographs and investigate the injuries to his right arm?
Yes, sir.
What's the width of the taillight, specifically from where it meets the lift gate to the left side? I'm sorry, to the side of the vehicle, the right side of the vehicle.
To the right. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, that is about 6.5 inches. Again, it starts to wrap around to the right side. So really, it's even though the taillight continues, it's not projecting out on the back end where it's again wrapping around. So in terms of the
also, I know some witnesses think that they saw. I don't know. I think the state was trying to say that Karen Reed was making a 3-point turn out of there, and for some reason, I do remember. I don't know. For some reason, I remember Karen Reed also agreeing that she made a 3-point turn. But I don't know. I think it was during the case, though. But I don't know what witness it would have came from. Maybe another witness might have said, oh, I did a 3-point turn and left out of there. Fuck, I don't remember. Because I was thinking that, okay, so, if John was scraped, if his arm was scraped by the tail light, could have just been from her, turning, doing a 3-point turn. And that's why it went from... No, actually, sorry. I'm thinking about the damage. So I'm thinking damage, maybe cocktail glass. And then as she was turning out of there, maybe he tried to go up to the car and then he got his arm scraped. Because if John threw a cocktail glass at her car and she knew that it hit her car, that would really explain, when they left each other, they were arguing. She was leaving those angry voice messages, what the fuck, fuck you, I fucking hate you and all that stuff. Because the last time they saw each other, might have been very vicious, right? Oh boy. But like I said, if I was a jury, it would just end there. Her scraping his arm with the taillight. And then everything that happened afterwards, I would not know. Because the state hasn't proven much to me.
Width that is facing the rear, if you will, it's about 6.5 inches.
And you noted that there was a dent and some paint chips that you identified above the liftgate, correct?
Correct.
How far away from the right side of the vehicle were those scratches and that dent?
Approximately 20 inches.
Oh, it was many years ago. I actually don't remember when I got married. 2 years ago. You know how people have their dates? All I know is I wanted to get married on April Fool's because I thought it'd be really funny to tell people that. Or Halloween. Halloween would have been a cool date too. But I think our date is somewhere in February, either on the 2nd or 22nd, but I don't remember what year. I don't know. It's been like 2 or 3 years. But we've been together for like a million years. So that's why the marriage date doesn't really matter to me.
What was the significance of that distance?
Well, again, to go back to your question about, I think, if somebody was holding a drinking glass, right, and their arm was extended to cause that damage, or if it's theorized that those dents and chips were from that, again, the thing that sticks out to me is that you have essentially the Lexus taillight.
So ask another question.
What? He was getting right into it. Come on to listen. Christine says, funny story. My husband never was in a wedding. When his daughter had her rehearsal dinner, he asked me why he had to learn how to eat. Wait. Why we had to learn how to eat at the wedding? Wait, what? I'm confused. I thought I was going to say dance.
What's the significance of whether or not there was damage between the dent and the taillight? In other words, that 20-inch area. Was it dented? Was it harmed in any way?
So in terms of, again, if we're talking about, again, looking at the back of the vehicle and we go to kind of where that right tail lamp.
Oh, like why do we have to feed our guests food at the wedding or something? Or I don't know, I'm confused. I think the jury will. I mean, I haven't listened to the biomechanical engineer person yet, but I mean, with ending with this witness, I would say the jury would probably find Karen Reed not guilty because they have not reached beyond a reasonable doubts.
Just meets the liftgate. As I mentioned, there's another lamp assembly on the liftgate itself. There's also a chrome trim piece above that, and then certainly the body paneling to the liftgate itself. And I think what stood out to me is that between that dent and the fractured taillight, there was no observable damage to that area, which I would have expected had an arm been positioned there.
Oh, you know what? The joke, it went above my head. Oh, rehearsal dinner. Gotcha. They were doing a rehearsal dinner, and he was like, why do we have to practice eating? Okay.
Can you calculate, or could you calculate, or did you calculate, the amount of force that would be required to strike a person just only on the outstretched portion of his arm in order to project him a number of feet, for instance, 30 feet in one direction or another?
I don't really
Okay,
think
so
that.
objection.
It was a biomechanical engineer person that did that.
Break it down.
I'll ask you the same question, but without the 30 feet.
Okay.
Were you able to calculate, or could you calculate, the force that would be required to strike a person on his outstretched arm hard enough to spin him around and project him a number of feet?
If you're talking about only an interaction between the arm and the back of the vehicle, no, there wouldn't be any projection. Again, if you think about this, the arm weighs about, again, with Mr. O'Keefe would be about 11 pounds.
That's why I'm thinking, okay, maybe at most, maybe the broken taillight just like scraped his arm. The projection thing is really hard to really absorb in because, again, the lack of bruises, and other experts have said this as well, that makes it hard for me to believe that he flew after getting hit in the arm. It just seems like it might have scraped his arm.
So you still have, another 200 plus pounds being held down by gravity, and the force is only acting on the arm. So essentially, the arm would be accelerated, but the whole body, because the center of mass is not being struck, would not be projected.
You also think weddings are a waste of money? I mean, if it's like really important to you, then it's worth it to you, right? But for me, it's like, I don't really care. I don't care. It's a waste of money. I don't like having all the attention on me. To me, it's like awkward. All the wedding stuff that they do to me is just awkward. Like the dances and all the speeches and all that stuff. Like, I don't know. That to me is just like awkward. I'm just like, I'm good. But yeah. Maybe if it was like a small, like I would be down if it was a small, not even a wedding though, but a small destination thing where me and my family and some close friends, we go somewhere, and just like have a really nice dinner, and then that's about it. Maybe, maybe do some speeches. But honestly, like that's all I don't know. Everything else about the wedding, I'm like, no. Like going down the aisle thing. Oh my God, I wouldn't even be like taking myself seriously. The vows thing, I don't think I would definitely want to get all teary eyed. I'd probably just start laughing. I don't know. I feel like it would just be so awkward, and I would just be like annoying, and I don't know. It's not me.
Is the absence of damage that you described between the dent and the rest of the vehicle, with the exception of the taillight, is that consistent or inconsistent with striking an outstretched arm of a human being?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
That would be inconsistent in my opinion.
May I have just a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
And you know what's the great thing about this witness testifying? He's so easy to listen to. He's so easy to follow. And when he's up there talking on the stand, he's so passionate about it. So you also feel a little passionate about it as well.
Dr.
You're a dead straight. Oh, I also don't have parents that would even pay for it. Yeah, none of my parents have money like that, and then we're not even close to any of our parents. So I could see it being like if you had your parents and they're willing to pay for your wedding, then like maybe just do it. But I don't know, man. I see a lot of times when people do their weddings, they usually do it for their family, and it's like I have to invite my extended relatives, which I don't care about, and then I have to invite my family's coworkers and friends that I don't really care about, and then most of the time during the wedding, I'm not even spending time with my close friends. I'm going around talking to everyone that I mostly don't really care about. I don't know. I see that a lot in weddings, and I feel like the bride and the groom just ends up getting really fucking drained. But I mean, you can always do weddings differently, right?
As to the amount of damage that you would expect to see at 15 miles per hour or above on the taillight, if in fact that vehicle were moving in reverse and were to strike something on a human body, for instance, an elbow or an arm.
Objection. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Probably not.
Sorry.
Is he FBI? He is not FBI. He's part of ARCCA. He's a crash reconstructionist guy. However, he was hired by the FBI. So when Jackson's up there asking him, oh, did we hire you? When it's like, nope. Have we talked to you? Nope. Were we the ones that told you to, examine X, Y, and Z and come to these conclusions? Nope. It was because they were hired by the FBI and they did their own research on their own based on the evidence that was given to them. So to that could look really good for the jury because like, okay, we have someone who's like from the outside, not the state police who's trying to prove their case, but we have someone coming from the outside who is just looking at the evidence and exploring possible avenues of what could have happened to John O'Keefe. Could have been him throwing the glass at the taillight. Could have been his head getting hit by the car, with the taillight. So we just have a very curious person who's just trying to find out answers.
Sorry.
I'm trying. Physics, that's why.
No, he's not FBI.
From your testing, what would you expect to see in terms of the damage to the right rear taillight? If in fact.
What did they list as a cause of death? So the cause of death was blunt force trauma and hypothermia. The manner of death, the medical examiner was not able to rule that because she felt like there was not much information. So the state police obviously wanted her to rule manner of death to be like, oh, John O'Keefe was struck by a vehicle. And that's why he had the blunt force trauma. And that's why he was unable, he was so unconscious that he was in the snow for X amount of time that he ultimately succumbed to like hypothermia and his brain swelling, right? So they had the cause of death, but not the manner of death.
That taillight were to make contact with a part of a human body, for instance, an elbow or an arm, at 15 miles an hour or above, what would the level of damage be as compared to the damage that you actually saw?
Well, if we compare it to, again, looking at the drop test that we did with the hybrid head, which weighs about 10 pounds. So again, if we're talking about now a human arm that's comparable in that same weight, we certainly would expect to see a comparable level of force and damage. So as I mentioned, if the arm is outstretched across the right tail lamp and into the liftgate section, I would certainly expect to see deformation to that body paneling, even potentially the tail light on the liftgate itself and that chrome piece as well.
Based on the entirety of your investigation, your entire team's investigation, all the testing that you did, all the biomechanical testing and the engineering and the physics testing that you did, in your expert opinion, was that taillight damaged by striking John O'Keefe on the head?
Objection.
Sustained.
In your opinion, was the taillight damaged by either striking Mr. O'Keefe on the head or the arm?
Objection.
Sustained.
Any reproach?
Yes.
You are muted.
Shamudo. Let me see if I can find photos from the back of the car. Karen Reed, because he's talking about the chrome pieces as well. The chrome pieces. Okay, so this is what he was trying to say. If the arm was, oh God, am I showing too much? Sorry, here, let me make it more isolated so you're not seeing all this junk that I have on my screen. Give me a second. Okay, here we go. So he's saying that if the arm was outstretched, right, you would see more damage to, I guess, the chrome pieces. Is there I know there's a chrome piece here. I don't know if there's a chrome piece up here, though.
May I go on?
Yes.
Last question, Doctor. In your expert opinion, based on all your testing, is the damage to the taillight that you saw consistent with striking a human head?
No.
In your expert opinion, is the damage to the taillight consistent with striking a human arm?
No.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, jurors, we will take our morning recess.
All right, report, please.
Oh, and that's
You
a
are
good
muted.
testimony for the defense. Damage is not consistent with striking head, which is not the state's theory anyways, but he explored it. Not consistent with striking arm. But I think there's a qualifier in there where it's like, oh, not consistent with striking someone's arm and then having them fly up into the air. Because I'm thinking like maybe it just like scratched his arm. okay. So what we got from Cannon Daddy. So Cannon Daddy works with he's basically the crash reconstructionist guy with the ARCCA. He talked about how there was issues with the crime scene photos that were taken because he said that usually when you're at the crime scene, you want to kind of take like a zoomed out photo. And then when there's evidence, you want to zoom in so you know exactly where on the scene the evidence was found, right? We had issues with the crime scene photos too because they looked very confusing. And there was a weird filter or coloration on there. I'm like, why is it so dark? It looks like the world is ending. He talks about how he did 2 tests. So he worked with Dr. Rentschler. And Dr. Rentschler is the person we're going to listen to next. And Dr. Rentschler is the biomechanical engineer. So he's going to talk about the damage of the car with respect to, you know, like John O'Keefe's bodies and injuries and stuff like that. They worked together, both from ARCCA. And 2 of the tests he did was 1, well, okay, this is what we're given. We're not allowed to do outside research, but here's the evidence. Here's all the stuff that we're going to review. And let's do 2 tests. First test is, what if someone threw the glass and it hit the taillight? Would that shatter of the taillight be consistent with what we're seeing on the damage on Karen Reed's car? And so he said they did 2 tests. I think one was at like 30 miles per hour, 40 miles per hour. And the reason why they chose those 2 tests is because that's a reasonable speed that an adult can throw a glass at a taillight. So he said at 37 miles per hour, when the glass was projectile from the cannon that they built themselves, that damage seems to be consistent with the taillight damage found on Karen Reed's car. So I was like, oh, okay. So maybe, you know, that's what happened. Maybe, you know, John and Karen were arguing in the car. John gets out, you know, because he's about to go inside the house, but, you know, he throws the drinking glass at Karen Reed's taillight. Now, a lot of you guys were like, oh, but, you know, there was glass found on the bumper that didn't match John O'Keefe's glass that he was holding. But I do remember that glass matched the glass that was found at the scene. So I'm like, okay, is there a second glass that was with them? Was it like a drinking water glass or something? But wouldn't there have been labels, you know? So we don't know where that glass came from. No fucking idea. The other test that he did, and this is not the state's theory, but the other test was, okay, so if John O'Keefe was hit in the back of the head with a taillight, would it be consistent with the damage and all that stuff? And he's like, no. So that's not the state's theory anyways. But I think he was a really good witness to have here to testify because, again, he was not hired by the defense. He wasn't spoon-fed, you know, certain evidence and stuff like that by the defense. He was basically hired by the FBI for the federal grand jury. And, you know, it's interesting that the state is not using him as their witness, of course, but the defense is. All right, so that's where we're at with him. I thought he was an excellent witness. I think when he went up there and testified, he was very lively. He was very into what he was talking about. You can tell he was very passionate, and he was very easy to follow and listen to. When it came to Trooper Paul, who was the state's crash reconstructionist, I wasn't really sure what he thought. It wasn't until at the very end when he was like pushed and pressured that he finally gave like, okay, so I think that John O'Keefe's fist made in contact with the back of where the lift gate is, and that's why there's a dent there. And then the tail light hit John O'Keefe's arm to the point where he either flew onto the grass and landed there, I guess. But like I said, I wasn't sure if Trooper Paul was also entertaining the fact that, okay, it could have been like John was hit and then he was still awake and then he crawled over to the grass area. I don't remember. Trooper Paul's testimony was kind of all over the place for me. Anyways, so yeah, I thought he was a really excellent witness. And, you know, same thing with the pathologist that testified earlier, the older gentleman. So I thought he did really good. I thought same thing. What he said seemed to be in line with the medical examiner that Lolly had. No issues with that. So next, our last witness we're going to listen from is going to be the biomechanical engineer guy. Again, he worked with the person who just testified just now for ARCCA, and he's a biomechanical guy. And I'm going to go pee really quick. What's my Discord link? Here it is. My Discord link should also be in the description box in the YouTube thing as well. Hi, JP sir, how are you doing today? Also, lady, how are you doing with Elden Ring? How's the Elden Ring stuff? Oh, courthouse wedding. That's what my brother did. Oh my God. The people there were so mean. The judge there was actually really nice though. But when I went to go visit my brother in Chicago, they did the courthouse. I mean, it wasn't even like a wedding thing. It was just like we went there. They signed some paperwork and I don't know if we even took pictures. I don't think we took pictures. But yeah, the courthouse wedding in Chicago sucks, okay? Because it was so God, Chicago drives me nuts sometimes. Okay, I mean, you guys have really good fucking food. Weather's pretty decent, but oh my God, like the way they do things there is like annoying sometimes. Like for me, I was able to have a third party to do my paperwork for me. But my brother told me in Chicago, you have to bring your ass to the fucking courthouse. And you had to make this appointment when this long ass line. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm using the bathroom. I'm sorry. I'm getting sidetracked. Okay. Oh gosh, I think today was my favorite court day so far. Like we had good witnesses, good testimonies, easy to follow. Oh boy. Let me see. Where is the... All right. So I think this is going to be the last witness for the trial. Yeah, I think the last witness for the trial. And then they're going to give the jury instructions and we got closing arguments. I'm so curious what Lolly's closing argument is going to look like. I wonder if it's going to be less convoluted than his opening statements. And also wonder, you know, because there has been some holes that I found in his theories. I wonder if he's going to address them or if he's just going to pretend like those holes were never uncovered by some of the experts and just continue on saying John O'Keefe was hit twice. He was hit once and then he was hit again when he was down. And then also Karen Reed had access to the ring and deleted footages. Okay. Because I feel like from all the experts that we've heard from, none of that seems to really line up. So I want to know if he's going to continue with those theories or if he's just not going to bring them up at all. I got grilled teriyaki chicken. That sounds good. I need to eat soon. Getting hungry. I had a good breakfast today, though. Sarah Birchmore's case. I have not heard about that. What is up with that case? Is that also in Canton? The bumper would have been the first thing to hit a person. It probably would have knocked you down before the taillight hits you, especially going at a speed sideways. Yeah, and I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about the bumper because the bumper technically projects out more, which would mean damage to John O'Keefe's legs. Like, I know the SUV is a higher ride. It sits up higher, but John O'Keefe is also a very tall person. So, you know, where my torso ends, John O'Keefe's torso might be like, I don't know, where my stomach is or something like that. Yeah, you would also expect that as well. That's what I was thinking, like, maybe he just got his arm scratched on the taillight. Oh, that's right. We have to cross Daddy first. Oh, that's right. That's very true. Yeah. Cross-examination of Kid and Daddy.
Hey, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
I forgot. I do have the picture, but it was like, I didn't really see much on the knee. I can show it again. This is the knee. It's not, I don't even know what I'm looking at. I think they said there was an abrasion on his knee. I guess it's this right here. I don't know. If I was a jury looking at this, I'd be like, I don't know what I'm looking at.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Now, you in conjunction with, Dr.
I'm not familiar with the Sandra Birchman case or Birchmore case. Sherry says ruled a suicide 2023, changed manner of death today to a homicide. Yeah, I'm not very familiar. If you guys want to give me like a quick little synopsis, feel free. The CW stated taillight shattered when it made contact with John O'Keefe's arm, causing injuries. While holding a glass, after Lex made contact with John O'Keefe, he did a counterclockwise spin until he landed. That's what I heard too. And then we started going into the projectile thing. So I wasn't sure if maybe both of them were both of those were Trooper Paul's theories, I guess.
Rentschler, is that correct?
Dr. Rentschler, yes.
So you, in conjunction with Dr.
Keep your voice up, Mr. Lally.
Yes. You, in conjunction with Dr. Rentschler and Dr. Klein, wrote a report in regard to your analysis, correct?
Correct.
And doctor, that report was issued on February 12th, 2024, is that correct?
You fall towards the car. I think it depends on the speed though. I think if you're at like lower speeds, you would fall towards the car, but at higher speeds, it's possible for you to kind of just like fly. I don't know. That's what I was thinking.
Correct.
And in the first paragraph of that report, the last two sentences, you or whoever the author of that particular portion indicates, this analysis is based on information currently available to ARCA and is only to be issued in its entirety. However, ARCA reserves the right to supplement or revise this report if additional information becomes available. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's pretty standard as far as your industry is concerned. You can only work with the information that you're provided. Is that correct?
Certainly.
Now,
Yeah.
in this instance, you were provided 10 things, and then there were 4 additional things that either you or the other doctors had reviewed as far as literature or things of that nature. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
And the 10 things that you were talking about were reports, an initial crime scene report, medical examiner dispatch removal report.
Or go underneath the car. I just don't know because he's such a tall man. I don't know if he would go underneath the car, and I don't know like if her vehicle kept going or if her vehicle stopped abruptly after hitting him. I think there's just too many factors I just don't know.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Photographs of the incident location. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how many sets of photographs of the incident location were you provided with?
In terms of the number of photographs?
Not the number of photographs. Or were there different sets of photographs?
Yes.
And how many sets?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I know that there was a series that were taken during the daytime as well as ones taken what appeared to be in the early morning hours.
And you were also provided video from the early morning hours. Is that correct?
From what I recall, I think it was daytime, but yes.
Photographs of the vehicle, photographs of recovered evidence. Is that correct?
Correct.
CDR report from the 2021 Lexus LX570. Correct?
Correct.
Autopsy report, autopsy photographs. Is that correct?
I think the puncture mark was from when they were trying to. I like vaguely remember this. Didn't they administer something in his tibia in order to either warm his body up, or it was a quicker way for him to get some sort of fluids or something like that? I think what they were focusing on was this very light bruising that he had on his leg.
Correct.
And then some other things. Those would be the 10 things that you were provided with, and then there were 4 other things that you reviewed or part of your team reviewed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, in regard to
I remember them saying tibia. Isn't tibia like the lower portion? Because the top portion is the humerus, right? The bottom portion is like the tibia and the fibia, I think, right?
there's a section in your report called Review of Materials, and it talks about photographs and glass fragments and plastic fragments and things of that nature, correct?
Correct.
You also talk about a black drinking straw that was recovered on scene, is that correct?
Correct.
However, there's no mention in the report about Mr. O'Keefe's shoe or Mr. O'Keefe's hat. Are you aware of those items as well?
Yes.
And are you aware that Mr. O'Keefe's shoe was actually found dug out from the snow, sort of flush with the curbing in front of the area where his body was found?
Yes.
So again, Trooper Paul says that, because one of his shoes got knocked off, it's consistent with getting hit by a motor vehicle. I think Proctor said the same thing and some other troopers as well. But it's like, so he was hit at a speed where his shoe was knocked off, but got no bruises. I don't know.
Now, over the course of your work as a crash
Oh, is the humerus your arm? Maybe? Wait, so is humerus the arm and then tibia fibia is arm as well? Let me look it up. It's been a while since I took anatomy, okay? Humerus. Bone. Humerus. Oh, humerus is arm. You're right. Okay, what about tibia fibia? Tibia fibia. Anatomy. Tibia fibia is the leg, the bottom portion of the leg. What's your, what's above that? What's above the tibia fibia?
Reconstructionists, and again, I don't mean this in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just curious. Typically, you're reconstructing or you're looking at.
Oh, the femur. Femur. Duh, we knew that. Femur. How did I get that mixed up with the humerus? I think it's because No. Hold on, let me think. have you guys seen my dog's x-ray? It's the most funniest thing ever. He's a little corgi and he did x-rays. And I remember I was laughing saying that his humerus was like, his bone was like this tiny. But that's because, I mean, dogs don't really have arms. They're all legs. But I think I referred to the humerus because, like, I don't know. It's like you refer them to the little arms, but they're all legs. Okay, sorry. I'm just stuck in my thoughts right now. Just ignore me.
Someone else's reconstruction in relation to something that occurred in the past, correct?
Not always, no.
Well, my question is, sir, how many times have you actually been on like a live scene where the vehicles are still in place at final rest, where their bodies in place at final rest? Have you ever been to a scene where those sort of conditions existed?
Certainly. We have a rapid response team that essentially we've been on site on the day of or the week of the incident, yes.
Now, how often is that?
I got blinded by that bald guy's head. Who are you talking about? The one that was testifying?
Not nearly as often as, like I said earlier, we primarily do litigation work. So again, by the time we're retained, obviously the scene has been is no longer present.
Scene's been cleared, items have been removed as far as evidence or other things. That's mostly what you deal with, correct?
Sure.
And as far as the hat that we were talking about before, is you aware that was recovered as well, same day as the drinking straw on February 3rd in the area where the body of Mr. O'Keefe was discovered?
In the area of the front yard, yes.
Now, you have some familiarity through working as a crash reconstructionist with pedestrian collisions, correct?
Correct.
Is it common or uncommon for in the course of a pedestrian collision, for a shoe or glasses or a hat or something to fall off of that pedestrian in the collision sequence near where the area of impact occurs?
Well, I think that depends on the interaction between the two. If it's more of a side swipe type interaction, if we're just talking about an arm, for instance, contact the vehicle, no, I would not expect the shoe to come off. If it's something where the entire body is interacting with the vehicle, then yes, there's a greater likelihood that something like a shoe will come off, yes.
So that is consistent in general terms with the pedestrian collision of the shoe coming off, correct?
Again, based on the interaction between the two. I wouldn't say it's a blanket statement that, again, in all pedestrian interactions, you will have a shoe come off.
And that's not the question I was asking. So what I'm asking is it generally consistent with pedestrian collisions that a shoe may come off during the collision sequence near the area of impact?
Shoes can come off in a pedestrian impact, yes.
Now, again, you were testifying earlier about...
I hate it when attorneys do that, but I know they do it in cross-examination, but I wish it's like, can we just focus on the specificities of this case, not just like talking in generalities where it's like, oh, can shoes come off in pedestrian collision? It's like, well, not in this case. Can shoes come off in pedestrian collision? Like, I mean, they could. I don't know. I just feel like you're just like obfuscating, you know? Let's just focus on the specific scenario. But I know something they do that. It's something they do in like cross-examination.
The damage to the Lexus being isolated in the area of the tail, correct?
Correct.
And that was based on the information that you were providing, correct?
Correct.
Now, with respect to any of the materials that you were provided, was there anything in the materials that you were provided that indicated that just the arm or outstretched arm of Mr. O'Keefe interacted with the vehicle?
No.
And based on your review of any of the materials?
I think quite a few people in my chat has been hit by a car. We were just talking about it a couple days ago.
That you were provided, was there any information stating that Mr. O'Keefe had been struck in the back of the head by the taillight assembly of the Lexus?
No.
And based on any of the materials...
Hey, Bleep.
Let me ask you, based on any of the materials that you provided, you're aware that Mr. O'Keefe is on video exiting from a bar minutes before crash occurs at approximately 12:11 a.m. holding a cocktail glass in his right hand?
I'm not aware of that video.
But Lolly, you need to explain to us about the glass in the bumper. Or is he just hoping that that went over the jury's head? I don't know if it went over the jury's head because I felt like when they said that really stood out to me. Like, oh wait, the glass didn't match. Wait, what? He's hoping the jury forgot. Maybe.
Is that correct? Now, other than the materials that we just went over, as far as the 10 things that you were provided, you weren't provided anything else. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
And so sort of the questions that you endeavored to answer, those were questions that you didn't know from any of the materials that you were provided. Is that correct?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, there was nothing in the material that indicated the questions we were to answer, if that's what your question was.
That is my question. So there was nothing in there. Is that correct?
Correct.
You have some extensive background in human factors, correct?
Correct.
And as far as visibility, and in particular, have you ever conducted a visibility analysis?
Absolutely, hundreds of times.
And you talked a little bit about conspicuity. Is that correct?
Yes.
And part of conspicuity, at least one of the factors, would be a reasonable expectation of, in particular when you're talking about a pedestrian, part of the conspicuity factors would include sort of a reasonable expectation that a pedestrian would be in the path of the vehicle. Is that fair to say?
I don't understand your question.
When you're talking about conspicuity or visibility analysis, in particular, you're talking about something called PRT or perception reaction time, correct?
Well, that occurs after recognition. So first, a driver has to recognize that there's a pedestrian there before they can actually respond to it. So once they've recognized the pedestrian, then you start the perception response time where, again, the driver has identified what the hazard is. They're making a decision about what to do. They might be moving their foot from the accelerator pedal to the brake pedal. So again, kind of that's the action or the time frame in which a driver is undergoing action to potentially mitigate the collision.
And perception reaction time, that's a pretty commonly used industry sort of standard as far as crash reconstruction goes, correct?
Well, I would say that it's used in the field of action reconstruction, but as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, there isn't a blanket number in terms of perception response time. As I mentioned, it's based upon the hazard that the driver is presented with. Again, if you've got a pedestrian crossing the roadway, that's going to be one particular perception response time based upon studies and naturalistic data versus a driver suddenly stopping in front of you, right? It's not the same perception response time in every scenario.
Oh, understood. And there's different variables that may affect that as far as someone's age, as far as the lighting that's available, other things. Is that correct?
Sure.
And one of those things might be the reasonable expectation of a pedestrian being present in the roadway as you're driving along, correct?
Expectancy can play a role, yes.
Expectancy, what we're talking about, sort of the disparity or the difference between driving along a country road where there's no houses for miles and miles versus an urban area where there's crosswalks every 15 feet, correct?
Sure.
Now, in that expectation of privacy, how high would that be if we're talking about a pedestrian that actually exited from the vehicle that then strikes?
I don't understand your question.
Let me ask you
What?
this. If the operator of the vehicle has
I don't understand that question either.
a passenger who then exits the vehicle and goes towards the back, would there be a high reasonable expectation that the pedestrian would be located in that area?
Oh, like he's saying that, like, oh, if John left Karen's car and walked towards the back, why would he walk towards the back though? Because the way they were parked, John would just be going straight into the house, not towards the back of her car, unless he had to get something from her trunk.
I don't know if I would classify it as high.
What would you classify it as?
I honestly don't know that I have a classification to it.
Now, you never looked at the defendant's vehicle in this case, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that the defendant's vehicle is still in police custody and available for inspection?
I'm not aware of that.
Did you ever ask to look at the defendant's vehicle?
No.
A typical pedestrian strike, for the most part, involves a pedestrian in front of a vehicle as it's coming down the street. Is that fair to say?
That can be one type of interaction, yes.
Is that more prominently seen as far as your field than a rear collision?
I would say that's fair.
And there are various types of sort of interactions.
Which Lolly brought up with the pathologist too. Like, oh, mainly when you see people getting hit by cars, it's with frontal collision, right? And he said, yeah.
Pedestrian can have with the vehicle in order to cause and sort of sustain injuries. Is that fair to say?
What I would say is that there's certainly, in terms of how the pedestrian interacts with the vehicle, in terms of whether they're being wrapped onto the vehicle or projected forward, certainly there's different types of interactions, yes.
So there's like a wrap and forward projection type of collision sequence. Is that correct?
Those are two common, yes.
There's also something called a fender vault. Is that correct?
Correct.
A fender what? Fender roll?
And sort of how
Fender vault?
or where that pedestrian is positioned with relation to the vehicle is somehow or somewhat determinative.
Types of interactions, yes.
So there's like
The vehicle, in terms of whether they're being wrapped onto the vehicle or projected forward, certainly there's different types of.
Okay, so he says there's different types of frontal collision. You could be wrapped around the vehicle, or there could be some sort of what did it say?
How the pedestrian interacts with the vehicle, in terms of whether they're being wrapped onto the vehicle or projected forward, certainly there's
Or
different
projected forward. Okay.
types of interactions, yes.
So there's like a wrap and forward projection type of collision sequence. Is that correct?
Those are two common, yes.
Because some of you guys were saying that, like, oh, usually when you get hit by a car, you land on the car. And I was like, I don't know. I think it depends on the speed, the person, and all that stuff.
Also something called a fender vault. Is that correct?
Correct.
And sort of how or where that pedestrian is positioned with relation to the vehicle is somehow or somewhat determinative of the injury sustained. Is that correct?
It can be, yes.
Obviously, you're going to see different injuries if someone fender vaults and goes over the top of the vehicle versus someone who is projected forward
Oh, fender vault. Okay.
from the collision sequence with the front of the vehicle.
Just to clarify, again, in this matter, I was not assessing injuries. That was Dr. Rentschler. I don't have an opinion.
What I'm saying is based on your experience, though, that you understand that there's a difference in the injuries that you might expect based on the type of interaction that a pedestrian has with the vehicle.
Yes.
And then if someone is wrapped and forward projected and then the vehicle overruns that person, there'd be a whole other host of injuries that you'd expect to see based on being overrun by the vehicle, correct?
There could be, yes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, if he was hit by the back of the car and then she came to like a abrupt stop afterwards. Or she came to an abrupt stop because she was making a 3-point turn, right? Like you're reversing and then you stop your car and then you go forward to continue your 3-point turn.
Now, the testing that you did with respect, these are essentially experiments that you're doing, correct?
That's fair, yes.
And
Well, I don't think it's 99% of the time because you don't know if, like I mentioned earlier, you don't know if how fast a car was going, if it's stopping or not, and you don't know the position of the pedestrian, if they're like, like where they are, if they've been forward. I don't know. I think there's too many factors to say that, 99% of the time you're falling forward towards the car.
correct in saying that in scientific experiments or in the world of scientific experiments, there are certain things called variables that you're trying to account for. Is that correct?
I would say that's fair, yes.
And essentially what you're trying to do is control as many of those variables as you can in order to best replicate whatever the conditions were at the time that, that what you're testing to see actually occurred. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, what, if anything, did you do to control variables in relation to temperature?
So one of the things we did with all of the tail lamp assemblies that we tested is that we preconditioned them to approximately 28 degrees, that they'd reached a steady state temperature before we subjected them to the impact testing.
And where in your report does it say that?
Oh, and I don't think Lolly expected that. Let's rewind it back.
Now, what, if anything, did you do to control variables in relation to temperature?
Because Lolly's trying to say, well, it was really cold that night. How do you know the taillight would have broken the way that you guys broke it if you guys didn't have the exact temperature of that night possibly? And he's like, oh, actually, you know, we did actually could control for temperature. We made it really cold that night, 28 degrees. And Lolly's like, where's that in your report?
So one of the things we did with all of the tail lamp assemblies that we tested is that we preconditioned them to approximately 28 degrees, that they'd reached a steady state temperature before we subjected them to the impact testing.
And where in your report does it say that?
I don't believe that's explicitly stated.
Is it implicitly stated anywhere in your report?
But again, I'm telling you, that's part of what we did for the testing.
I understand that's what your testimony is, but you wrote a report, correct?
Right, and I don't know that I detailed every single part of the test. Again, we summarized it.
Understood. So what did you do to control any variable as far as wind?
Well, when you're talking about a projectile
I mean, I feel like that should be written in the report, though. That's really important.
such as a glass, again, that's being projected at 37 miles per hour, again, there would be probably minimal effects in terms of the wind.
Even if there was a blizzard going on?
Again, what we're going after here is
Oh, no. When I was saying, okay, Sherry says 7,000-pound vehicle hitting an 11-pound arm would not cause a vehicle to come to stop abruptly. What I meant was if she was in the process of her three-point turn and didn't realize that, or maybe did realize that her taillight scraped John's arm. In the middle of the three-point turn, she was backing up, braked, and then hit the accelerator to go forward. Not that she was doing a three-point turn, and because she hit John's arm, the vehicle came to a stop. I'm saying that like, either she stopped the car or she was in the middle doing her three-point turn, and whatever it was.
ultimately conducting a test such that the drinking glass arrived at the location of the taillight. So if you're trying to say that, okay, he threw it this way and the wind blew it towards the taillight, sure, that could be a possibility.
And sir, I'm not trying to say anything. I'm just asking, are you aware that there was a blizzard and that there were wind gusts up to 37 miles per hour during the time that this collision occurred, and that's not accounted for in your test?
Were you aware of that, sir?
I'm aware that there was inclement weather at the time, yes.
I don't know where Lolly's getting with this. Is Lolly trying to say that, like, oh, you know, even though you did it at 37 miles per hour, is it possible that the wind could have pushed the glass back and it wouldn't have hit it the way that you guys projectiled it from the cannon? Is that what he's trying to say?
Now, with respect to what type of glass did you use?
So we used a rocks drinking glass. So that's a glass that has a thicker base and a shallower sidewall.
And so what I'm asking, sir, was it cocktail glass, was it pint glass? What kind of drinking glass are we talking?
He literally just said rocks drinking glass. So I don't know. I was like, maybe Lolly couldn't hear the witness, but he's speaking pretty clearly and loud, but maybe Lolly couldn't hear.
Rocks drinking glass.
And how tall is that rocks drinking glass that you use?
The guy's like, I just told you, it's a rocks drinking glass. The base is thicker and the sides are more thinner.
If I had to estimate, I think it was about 3 or 4 inches tall, probably.
And the thickness, did you measure that as far as the thickness of the bottom of the glass?
No.
Was the thickness of the bottom of the glass thicker or more thick or less thick than the top of the glass?
He said it was thicker.
Are you talking about this in comparison to the sidewall?
Bottom.
Of the glass?
Talking about in comparison to itself. So you have a glass, this rocks glass. Was the bottom thicker or the top thicker?
Was the bottom thicker or the top thicker? The guy's like, you mean the side? No. I'm talking about in comparison to the glass. Was the bottom thicker or the top thicker? It's like, what do you mean? The top? There's nothing at the top of the glass. It's the sides of the glass. So he's like, look at his face. He's like, what are you asking me?
Glass thicker or more thick or less thick than the top of the glass?
Are you talking about this in comparison to the sidewall of the glass?
Talking about in comparison to itself. So you have a glass, this rocks glass. Was the bottom thicker or the top thicker?
Unless he's trying to be snarky to throw the witness off, but to me, this part right here is unnecessary.
The sidewall would be taller, if you will, than the base.
And so when you're projecting this thing out of the device that you created, the whatever it was, are you
Out of the whatever it was. Oh, he's throwing shade and trying to be snarky. Because this is a surprise thing that when the witness talked about building this cool cannon, he was very prideful of it. He was like smiling, like, yeah, that was pretty cool. And then Lolly's like, you know, when you threw it out of the whatever the thing was. Oh, God. I don't think we need to be snarky to this witness because this witness has been pretty chill so far. There are sometimes when you are questioning a witness on the stand where they are very hostile and they're snarky themselves. And I can see why attorneys want to be, you know, snarky back. But this guy has been super chill, okay? Like, I don't know, man. Yeah, I don't know if this looks good to the jury.
The sidewall would be taller, if you will, than the base.
And so when you're projecting this thing out of the device that you created, the whatever it was,
device that you created, the whatever it was, the Canon. It's just a Canon. It wasn't even like a hard name to say. It's just a Canon. Hi, Kyra. How are you doing today? How's it going? Lala's not listening. He just rapid firing questions. Yeah, I think maybe he has like a script that he's like sticking to or something. But it's just, to me, I think it doesn't look good.
Are you facing sort of the top of the glass where you would be sipping out of, or the bottom of the glass at the tail?
So in the testing, the interaction between the taillight and the glasses was primarily between the base and the taillight.
Now, with reference to, I asked you a little bit about the video, and you weren't aware of Mr. O'Keefe exiting from the waterfall bar at 12:11 in the morning.
No, they didn't do closing arguments yet. Or closing arguments is tomorrow. I think right now they're working on jury instructions. But closing arguments are tomorrow because after Dr. Rentschler, I think he's a doctor, testified, I think they sent the jury home for the day.
15, 20 minutes before he struck by a vehicle. You're not aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
Now, with reference to that particular establishment, was there anything stopping you or the other doctors that you were working with from going to that establishment, finding out what kind of glasses they had, getting an actual cocktail glass from that establishment?
I had no idea that video existed.
Did you even know that Mr. O'Keefe was at a bar before he was struck by the vehicle?
I believe that in one of the incident reports we reviewed that there was, I think, a narrative about that.
Yeah, so Lolly's trying to say, like, oh, couldn't it be important what type of glass you use? I don't know. Possibly. I think Rock's drinking glasses generally, I don't know. To me, it would just be very similar. But I don't know. It could be different, right? And then also, he never really mentioned when he redid the did he get an exact Lexus taillight this year? I don't think that was mentioned. But I'm assuming he might have. Probably did it.
They had been at a bar drinking, yes.
How is it that you determined where on the taillight assembly?
Oh, you got a notification? I should sign up for her app. That way I can get notifications too. What does the notification say? It's my understanding they sent the jury home for the day. Or did they do a lunch? No, they sent the jury home for the day, no? No, closing arguments is scheduled for tomorrow for Erica D. Baker or Emily D. Baker. Yeah, closing arguments tomorrow. Today was just jury instructions.
So we looked at the fracture pattern and what it appeared.
Oh, did Lolly have rebuttal witnesses? No. I don't know why this trial went the way it did. I think Lolly should have saved some of his witnesses' testimony for rebuttal. That way, the flow would have went a little bit smoother, in my opinion. You know, like have the experts go up there and talk about the Jen McCabe history, the phone calls, blah, blah, blah. And I forgot, there was like something else that's like really specific. And then rebuttal address that. That way we're not kind of like all over the place. I don't know. I think the rebuttal witnesses would have been nice to have, but Lolly kind of just did everything when the state presented their case, and then that's it.
To be that it was emanating from basically where the clear portion meets.
I didn't hear any testimony about the glasses from either bar. Did I miss that? There was no, when they had people testifying from the bars, I don't know if they were both from the waterfall or one was from CF McCarthy, one was from the waterfall, but I know that two people testify about the bar. They didn't talk about the glass or the receipt, which I don't know why. Maybe none of them were gonna, I don't know. I know like Lolly tried to get the receipts in, but the objection was sustained and he wasn't able to. They were able to mention like, oh, this is the total and this is how much the Tito's vodka was and the beer was like $5 or something. But the glass was only really brought up in the surveillance footage. So, for example, when they were drinking at the first bar, CF McCarthy, you can see Karen Reed leaving with the glass. And then when they were leaving the waterfall, which was the second bar, you can see that as everyone was leaving, there's a footage of John picking up a glass and then leaving with it. So that's all I know about the glasses. We never found out what the band played, right? No, I don't think so.
It's the red cover. We kind of saw that the fracture pattern emanated from that, so that's where we targeted it.
Now, when you did this testing as far as the sort of breakage or the pieces that came off the taillight, is it fair to say that they were of sort of different shapes and sizes, broken pieces?
Oh God, I have a pimple right here. I should not pick. Okay, make sure I don't pick it. If you see me doing this, guys, tell me not to pick it.
Sure.
Consistent with the broken pieces that were found on the scene near Mr. O'Keefe's body?
Yes.
But not the bumper, right? Where's the glass from the bumper from, Lolly? Where is it from? We want to know.
So I would say that's fair.
Now, I know you may not be the person, the sort of breakage or the pieces that came off the taillight. Is it fair to say that they were of sort of different shapes and sizes of broken pieces,
Sure.
consistent with the broken pieces that were found on the scene near Mr. O'Keefe's body?
Yes, I would say that's fair.
That's taillight pieces. Who's Sasquatch?
Now, I know you may not be the person for this, but just as far as your reviewed some of the autopsy report and medical findings in regard to Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
And the injuries to Mr. O'Keefe were primarily on the right side of his body, correct?
Correct.
So there were injuries to his right arm and forearm, elbow area, correct?
Correct.
There was bruising to his right hand, do you recall that?
Yes.
There was an abrasion to the outside or the posterior of his right leg near his knee, do you recall that?
I don't know that I recall that off the top of my head.
And do you recall sort of the skull fracture or the laceration immediately outside of the skull fracture was on sort of the right back of his head?
Yes.
What am I
Now,
picking?
from the
I was picking
reports
the.
that you reviewed,
I don't know. I have like a pimple thing or something here. I don't. It's not like a pimple, but it's like a thing. I don't know, like a whitehead maybe.
were you aware that when Mr. O'Keefe's body was discovered by the defendant and two of Mr. O'Keefe's friends, that the defendant was the only one who could see him in the conditions?
Objection.
Sustained.
As far as the lighting was concerned in that area where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, are you aware there was no overhead street ambient lighting or anything like that?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
What?
I'm not aware of that.
And you didn't do any visibility analysis or anything in relation to this case, correct?
That wasn't a part of my scope in this case.
Well, as far as part of your scope, did you define that you indicated earlier that there were questions that you didn't find in the materials that you conducted experiments to prove or disprove, correct?
Well, again, the entity that retained us in this asked us to evaluate whether or not the damage to the vehicle and the injuries to Mr. O'Keefe were consistent with the interaction or in interaction between the two.
No, not ingrown hair.
So you were at least somewhat restricted in the scope of what you could do based on the parameters given to you by the agency that hired you. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
It's hard. It's like hard right here.
That morning when Mr. O'Keefe's body was discovered, were you familiar with any of those?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
I'm not familiar with.
Sure.
Oh, you know what's worse than ingrown hair? I think ingrown nails, right, are the worst. Oh, God.
You are unmuted.
Statements at any point where you did you review materials or were you made aware that the defendant said to multiple people on scene, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him?
I'm not aware of that.
Oh, keratin lumps? What are
Can I have a
those?
moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Oh, sore spots besides the nails. Oh, the worst is when there's like a skin hanging out, and then you peel it, and then it's like it like goes a little too high and it stings. Oh my God. Okay, this is gonna be so gross. But when I was a kid, I had a dream that I picked it and it went all the way up my arm, and like it was burning. It was such a bad dream.
There's an indication that if either Mr. O'Keefe's arm or head had interacted with the taillight, there'd be some expectation that either blood or DNA would be contained on that taillight. Is that correct?
I believe, yes, that was stated in the report.
And at any point were you made aware that Mr. O'Keefe's DNA actually was recovered from that?
But Lolly, blood though. No blood. We have issues with that. No blood.
Taillight assembly from.
It would be a huge thing if Karen Reed and John O'Keefe didn't know each other. And then it's like, well, how the fuck did John O'Keefe's DNA end up on your taillight then, ma'am? Oh, because I'm his boyfriend and I live at his house sometimes? Oh, okay.
From the defendant's view.
No, I was
I
not.
don't know. Like, great, you found DNA, but blood would have been a huge, like, factor for us.
As far as forensic reports, what, if anything, were you provided in reference to that, other than the initial crime scene report?
Are you talking about specific to the scene or forensic reports to the body?
Forensic reports specific to the evidence that was recovered from the scene and from the defendant's vehicle.
Only what would be listed in the report.
Also, the hair, I was like, okay, did it come from John O'Keefe's head? Or was it like his arm hair? But it looked kind of long to be an arm hair. And we've seen pictures of his arms. They don't look super long and hairy, unless I'm misremembering. Let me see. Maybe they were.
Now, you indicated one of the materials that you were provided and you reviewed was the EDR, event data recorded data.
The crash data retrieval report, yes.
Now, were you shown anything as far as a crash reconstruction report from a trooper from the state police?
No.
And the EDR data that you observed, did that contain any sort of usable data?
There was no events recovered on the black box.
And with respect to there being no events recovered on the EDR or the black box in a pedestrian collision, is that unusual?
It is not.
And why not?
Well, because you're talking about, excuse me, a very large weight difference between the vehicle and the pedestrian. So ultimately, what the vehicle is constantly monitoring is acceleration, which gets back to a term called delta V. So when the vehicle doesn't experience a big delta V, typically the threshold for a non-deployment event where you're not firing airbags or any safety mechanisms, but the vehicle wakes up and says,
Oh, okay. So this is what Troopers Paul said, and we finally have something that Trooper Paul has said that's like, okay, you're correct. I'm sorry, he might have said some other things too, but I wasn't sure if he wasn't able to retrieve it because he just didn't know how to, or he just fucked it up somehow.
hey, there was something that I potentially hit. And it's usually at a threshold of about 5 miles per hour. So again, given the weight difference, we usually don't see delta Vs that high with pedestrians.
And is that in some respects because what EDR and what the safety restraint systems are designed to protect is the occupants of the vehicle, correct?
That's fair, yes.
I mean, there are more innovations as far as vehicles that are more modern or released earlier that have certain pedestrian or protections for other vehicles, but primarily what they're focused on is the occupants of the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Now, at any point in time, when you've shown any texturing data, Toyota texturing data from the defendant's vehicle?
No.
So you weren't shown any data indicating that the defendant's vehicle was operated in reverse?
The objection sustained. Next question.
Oh, I wanted to listen to the rest of that.
So with regard to the defendant's statements, were you also not told that the defendant told several people that she had just gotten into a fight with Mr. O'Keefe right before?
when people put it in that way, I always laugh. I don't know, it just sounds so fun. I'm just like imagining the hair like clinging on for dear life. Oh, I mean, I was thinking like maybe it froze on the bumper, but I don't know. The hair thing just doesn't really matter to me. Finding the hair on the bumper, to me, it wasn't a big deal. It would have to be like a hair with blood on it.
She dropped him off at 34 Fairview Road.
So that's sustained.
Ooh, sustained. All right, Lolly, what else you got? What else you got? What else you got? What else you got?
Now, with regard to
Blade, did you finish the Elden Ring stuff yet?
pedestrian collisions, you're familiar with sort of the physics term, I'm presuming, Doctor, as far as like center of mass?
Yes.
And what kind of role does the center of mass for a pedestrian play in relation to the center of mass of a vehicle as far as how the two interact?
Well, it depends, again, on the vehicle structure. And again, when you're talking about where's the hood height, the bumper height, and the CG, or the center of gravity of the pedestrian, that, again, will kind of dictate how they interact with between the vehicle and the pedestrian.
Now, typically, a typical pedestrian collision, again, that we were speaking about before, is in relation to a pedestrian struck by the front of the vehicle, correct?
Also, I'm getting so distracted by this wire. It looks like a heart. Were these wires here before? We have a little heart right next to Dr. Wolf.
Correct.
The judge trying to say something? Sorry, I'm just being mature.
And so in a typical pedestrian collision, that involves more of an assumption of the velocity of the striking vehicle than you would see occur in sort of a side swipe. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
In a typical pedestrian collision, that would involve more of an assumption of the velocity of the striking vehicle by the pedestrian than you would see in a typical side swipe collision. Is that correct?
If I understand your question correctly, yes. If the vehicle is striking the center of gravity of a pedestrian as opposed to just, for instance, the limb, yes, the center of gravity of the body.
ADHD, like the expert that previously testified, my mind might be wandering.
is striking.
Is that correct?
If I understand your question correctly, yes. If the vehicle is striking the center of gravity of a pedestrian as opposed to just, for instance, the limb, yes, the center of gravity of the body will be accelerated up to that speed.
Now, with respect to the defendant's vehicle, again, you never actually looked at the defendant's vehicle, is that correct?
It wasn't necessary.
And did you look at the actual taillight housing from the defendant's vehicle?
I had sufficient photographs of the taillight.
Did you ever look at the actual physical broken pieces of the taillight from the defendant's vehicle?
Again, I had sufficient photographs that documented the fragments and pieced them together.
And you're aware, at least, that the fragments that were recovered on scene were then sort of put back together and overlaid over the taillight housing that was taken from the defendant's vehicle?
Yes.
And through any of the pictures or the photos that you observed, did you ever see a piece of metal protruding underneath the broken and shattered plastic pieces from the taillight?
Yes.
I believe it was a plastic chrome piece.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. Where's Lolly going with this?
And when you were doing the testing as far as shooting the drinking glass at the taillight?
Maybe nowhere. I don't know. Anytime I think Lolly's going somewhere with it, it's like, it kind of just ends flat. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Like assembly. That taillight assembly was sort of held there by vice grips or something like that. Is that correct? It wasn't actually physically attached to a vehicle that you were shooting at?
That's correct.
Now, as far as that, you're familiar with, there was a piece of a broken drinking glass that was recovered from the same area of where Mr. O'Keefe was found. Is that correct?
Amongst the fragments of the taillight, yes.
And are you familiar with Mr. O'Keefe's DNA being present on those pieces of the exterior of a broken drinking glass located near his body?
I don't believe so.
Now, as far as Mr. O'Keefe's clothing, his fingernails, are you aware that there was DNA of Mr. O'Keefe and no one else recovered from both his fingernails and from a variety of areas of his clothing?
Sustained.
That's a good way to remind the jury, I guess, though. The jury can't unhear that.
From the crime
I actually forgot about that.
scene reports that you reviewed, are you aware that there was human hair that was located on the right rear quarter panel near the dent that you were talking about?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
Yes.
Are you familiar or are you aware that subsequent mitochondrial DNA testing found that the mitochondrial DNA profile for that hair was consistent to a probability of 99.895% with the mitochondrial DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
I'm not aware of that.
I
Now,
don't think
were
it's
you
a
also
huge
aware that the
deal.
broken drinking glass with Mr. O'Keefe's DNA on it was found to be consistent with broken drinking glass pieces that were found in the street?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Were you aware that the pieces from the exterior of the broken drinking glass found near Mr. O'Keefe's body with his DNA on it were then found to be consistent with pieces of broken drinking glass that were located in the street of 34 Fairview Road?
Yes.
I thought he already asked this.
Were you also aware that pieces of glass that you were talking about
Has this trial dragged on, in your opinion? Yes. 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 And you know what? I wouldn't have cared if it dragged on this long if when we got to the experts and witnesses, if they actually gave us some good information of substance, but it was like bits and pieces of information that sometimes kind of just led to more questions than answers.
from the defendant's bumper were found to be consistent with pieces of glass recovered from the street in front of 34 Fairview Road?
Yes.
Were you aware that there were microscopic pieces of red and clear plastic, about a 16th of an inch by 16th of an inch, that were recovered from Mr. O'Keefe's clothing? That were
Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, I found the bug. Hold on. I have to kill it. I found the fly. I found it, Chiro. You're good. I killed it. Chiro. Ah! Ew. Okay, I found him. I don't kill bugs, but I will kill flies and mosquitoes because they're fucking annoying. All right, let's do this.
then found to be consistent with the tail?
No, I don't believe so.
Now, as far as, again, you weren't provided with any sort of reconstruction report from a Trooper Paul from the state police?
No, I was not.
You're not aware that he took measurements from the ground to where certain items were on the vehicle?
Objection.
The objection sustained. He didn't see the report. Sure. Yes.
Oh, my dog bites the air trying to catch flies. It's kind of cute. Shiro does that too, but not with flies. There's something about their bzzz that like drives him crazy. I think because like they buzz around his ears and he gets really scared of them. I don't know why he's scared of them. Bees, they buzz, but he'll try to eat them. Mosquitoes will try to eat. Moths, butterflies, he'll try to eat. No, Shiro doesn't. Not with flies. For some reason, he's just scared of flies. Hi Yoshi, how are you doing today? He's just scared of flies. I don't know why. Like just kill the just kill the fly. I don't know. It's something about them buzzing and like it like fucks with them somehow. But not bees. Which is weird. Not bees. Chicken and noodles. Oh, that sounds so good. He is a big scaredy cat. Those flies don't buzz, right?
My apologies. I'm just,
Yes.
Mosquitoes, gnats, they're all annoying. Flies, fruit flies, they're all
Now,
annoying.
doctor, in the course of your analysis or review of materials here, were you ever provided with a video of the defendant backing out of a garage and making contacts with Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle in his driveway at about 5:07?
I think this is outside of his scope. I don't think he looked at the vehicle and then determined whether or not the damage caused by the taillight could be caused by her backing into John O'Keefe's car. I don't think it happened that way because I think the bumper would have stuck out more, and it seems like she was going pretty slow.
In the morning on January 29th?
No.
But he's just saying it to remind
Now, as far as from your review and
the jury.
your testing and everything that you did in this case, if a collision occurred at a lower speed, say 1, 2, anywhere from 0 to 5 miles an hour, would that create the damage to the taillight that you observed in this particular case?
At that speed, no.
1, 2.
Sorry, I want to go back real quick.
Now, as far as from your review and your testing and everything that you did in this case, if a collision occurred at a lower speed, say 1, 2, anywhere from 0 to 5 miles an hour, would that create the damage to the taillight that you observed in this particular case?
At that speed, no.
Oh, if she were to back up into John O'Keefe's car going like at low speeds. Okay.
Then we can do our 2 o'clock.
Correct.
So there were about 10 items that you were provided that you reviewed, is that correct?
Correct.
And a number of different items that I just asked you about that you weren't provided with or you weren't aware of, correct?
Correct.
And again, in your report, in the very first paragraph, you indicate, however, ARCA reserves the right to supplement or revise this report if additional information becomes available, correct?
Correct.
Was there additional information that they can get that would change their mind?
All right, Mr. Jackson.
What additional information did it not have that would change their mind?
Very briefly, Dr. Wolf, you were asked on cross-examination a couple of questions about hair, DNA on the outside of the taillight lens, I'm sorry, the taillight housing, and glass material. You recall that?
Yes.
Does any of that change your opinion about your...
Is it chicken and noodle soup or is it like chicken and stir fried? I mean, everything just sounds delicious. I love noodles. So good.
your opinions and conclusions in this case?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
Absolutely not.
Oh, yeah, I have a bug zapper. So I have the bug zapper lamp that we put downstairs. Because sometimes it's hard to catch all the flies, right, and all the mosquitoes and stuff. So we have a little. It's like the camping light, but we just leave it lit in our house. Oh, with gravy, that's so good. What does she whisper? I don't know. Some sort of satanic shit. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I couldn't hear.
What is your conclusion as to whether or not the damage to the vehicle and the injuries to the human being are consistent or inconsistent with the vehicle interaction?
Objection.
Sustained. All right, Dr. Wolf, you are all set, sir.
Thank you.
You're all set. So, tomorrow closing arguments. I don't know if I want to watch it live. I might just, because the jury's going to deliberate for a couple hours, you know? I don't think I'm going to watch the closing arguments live. I don't want to wake up that early. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I don't want to wake up that early. I'm on West Coast time, okay? It's like 6 a.m. for me, and 6 to 7 a.m. for Lolly closing argument. I don't know. That's rough. That's a rough one. All right, next witness.
I do.
Dr. Wenchler. I don't know how to spell your last name, so please tell me how to do it, please. Doctor?
May I inquire? Yes. Doctor, could you please state your first and last name, spelling your last name for the record, please?
Certainly. Andrew Rentschler, Rentschler.
And what do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a biomechanical engineer and accident reconstructionist.
And who do you work for?
Oh, I thought it was with a W. Okay. Biomech engineer and crash recon. Okay.
Work for a company called ARCA LLC.
How long have you been in that position as working for ARCA, first of all?
I've been with ARCA for about 16 and a half years now.
You indicated that you're the director of biomechanics and human factors, is that right?
I am. I'm a vice president and the director of biomechanics for the Midwest Division.
Can you tell us what education, training, and background qualifies you to perform your duties as the director for biomechanics and human factors?
Sure. Well, I've got my BS in mechanical engineering with a minor in biomedical engineering from Carnegie Mellon University in 1995. I then went on to get my master's in bioengineering and biomechanical engineering from the University of Pittsburgh in 2002.
Goodbye. Wait, I'm curious. When trial starts for you guys, what time is it? What's your local time when the trial starts? For me, when the trial starts, it's 6 a.m. my time. I think for 2 of the trial dates, I woke up early because it was a cross-examination of Brian Albert and Jen McCabe. But everything else, I was like, I can't. I can't. Oh, 3 p.m. Okay, 3 p.m. That's easy. We have real experts. I know we have real experts right now. 8 a.m. Okay, not too bad. It's just too early for me. 6 a.m. I'm just like.
And then I went to get my doctorate or my PhD in bioengineering and biomechanics from the University of Pittsburgh in 2004.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to scroll through his credentials, and we are just going to get to the meat.
One of the big things that we did, or one of the major points, was people in wheelchairs. So if you have to propel a manual wheelchair, you put a lot of stress and force on the arm, the shoulder, the elbow, the hands, carpal tunnel. So we look at the injuries that are produced during those types of events. How can we reduce the force acting on the body for someone like that? So it's
Sorry, I got sucked in for a second. That's
looking at, again, how the body responds, how we can set up a chair differently to actually reduce the amount of force someone might experience doing that type of an activity.
Mass or extremity, 1,000 pounds of force because of the speed of the vehicle.
Well, force is equal, Newton's second law of force is equal to mass times acceleration. So the acceleration is going to be the same.
Remember when Jackson asked Trooper Paul, what is acceleration or what is velocity? It was one of those, which is very basic physics. Oh, I forgot what he asked. And then, I don't know, Trooper was just really nervous, but he didn't really give the definition. He was just trying to explain it out. That to me was very interesting, but I think maybe he was just nervous on the stand. I don't know. I would never forget that.
It depends on the
East Coast, 3 hours ahead of you on the West Coast. 9 a.m. You're in North Carolina. Formulas experiments. Wow.
Mass of whatever body part's being hit. So from the testing that we did at 15 miles an hour, we used a head form, which weighs about 11.
Oh, sorry. Let me go back. I think I went too far.
Actually did and performed with respect to this case.
Making determinations and conclusions about the incident?
That we did. There was a distinction. Certainly some of our work overlap, but there was a distinction with what each of us actually did and performed with respect to this case.
Following your review and your investigation and analysis, did you make any determination as to whether any of the injuries suffered by Mr. O'Keefe in this case were consistent with producing the damage that was seen on the SUV?
I did, yes, sir.
And what did you base your opinion on?
My opinion was based on certainly the medical records, the description of what the injuries were, the damage that we have to the Lexus, primarily the right rear tail light cover, as well as we performed testing to evaluate the strength of that tail light cover and look at the damage associated with different types of impacts. And also to look at the overall evidence of where everything was found, where Mr. O'Keefe was found, what the injuries were, how they may or may not have occurred based on the damage we have to the vehicle.
So did you look specifically to find whether or not you could determine the forces required for Mr. O'Keefe to suffer the injuries that you saw in the records, medical records, et cetera?
I did, yes. I determined in my analysis whether there was sufficient force with that damaged taillight and interaction with that taillight to produce any of the injuries that were listed or diagnosed in the autopsy report and the medical records.
Generally speaking, what injuries would you expect to see in a vehicle-pedestrian interaction at, say, 24 miles per hour?
Objection.
I'll allow that. Just generally, Dr. If you would, please.
Yes,
Your
answer
Honor.
it. Answer it.
So 24 miles an hour, once you get up to that speed, you start to see fractures. You see significant ligament and tendon damage. Usually about 15 mile an hour impact is where you start to see damage to, for instance, the leg and the knee. At that speed, you're going to produce, if you impact the vehicle, you're going to produce upwards of 1,000 pounds of force on the body, depending on what part of your body impacts the vehicle. So certainly at 25 miles an hour, you start to see significant injuries occur.
Is that true for any part of the body that is struck, whether it's center mass or extremity? 1,000 pounds of force because of the speed of the vehicle?
Well, force is equal, Newton's second law of force is equal to mass times acceleration. So the acceleration is going to be...
And I know no one wants to ask this, but it's like, is it possible for him to have the cracked taillight and scratch his arm and produce those injuries? Just if it like glazed his arms and just like, you know what I mean? Is it possible? That's what I want to know.
The same. It depends on the mass of whatever body part's being hit. So from the testing that we did at 15 miles an hour, we used a head form, which weighs about 11 pounds. And that produced almost 1,000 pounds of force, a little under that for the head. So anything that weighs 11 pounds is going to produce almost 1,000 pounds of force. The heavier the object, if you get hit center mass, that's going to be even greater force because that's more mass than just 11 pounds. So the acceleration is the same for each body part. It just depends on the weight of the body part and how heavy it is to determine the force that's actually exerted on the body.
Did you review, in furtherance of your conclusions and opinions, did you review records that indicated injuries to both a head as well as an arm, the right extremity, right arm?
I did, yes, sir.
Taking those one at a time, is the injury to the head that you saw consistent?
Oh, did he get 11 pounds from the arm wing? 11 pounds? Possibly the head as well?
With having been struck by a vehicle at 24 miles per hour?
It is not, no, sir.
Can you explain why that is?
There's a couple of reasons. First of all, and the main reason is that to get the injury, it was a fracture at the occipital region of the head, which is basically on the back bottom part of the head. So in order to have that part of the head contacted by the tail light, you would somehow have to have a configuration or be standing in a manner that the rest of your body doesn't get hit because there's no other significant injuries to the body. If there's enough force to cause a skull fracture, then there's going to be certainly enough force to cause injury to the rest of the body. So first of all, you have to determine how could you configure somebody could actually be standing to have only the head impacted.
Right. That's not the state's theory, but they're exploring it because they just went in it, like going into it like blindly, just with the evidence that was presented to them. They don't know anything else about it. They don't know anything from what the troopers have said, I guess. They're just like, okay, here is what we got. We've got pictures of the injuries. We have the damage from the vehicle. We have where evidence was found, where John O'Keefe was found. And let's try to figure out what could have happened here.
The back of the head. And even if that was the case, if somebody positioned themselves in such a manner to have that occur, you're still going to see other
neck damage,
injuries related to that. For instance, with a cervical spine, over 1,000 pounds of force acting on the head, you're going to get significant cervical injuries, fractures, disc injuries, tendon and ligament injuries. So the fact that we only have that head injury and only damage to the occipital portion of the skull is inconsistent in this case with being struck by that tail light. And then there's also the evidence that we saw when we did the testing at 15 miles an hour, where we dropped the head form. So that would be akin or like a vehicle backing up at 15 miles an hour hitting the head. We had more damage to the tail light in that test than what we saw with the subject tail light cover. So if you're going 24 or 25 miles an hour, even faster, you're going to see even greater damage, greater fracturing of that rear tail light. And we just don't have that in this case. So both the physical evidence as well as looking at the biomechanical aspects of it are inconsistent with that head injury occurring due to impact with the rear of the Lexus.
Shifting to the arm, are the same forces at play if instead of the head making contact with the taillight is an outstretched arm, for instance, at the elbow area of a human being, a person 73 inches tall, weighing 215 pounds?
Objection.
The objection sustained. Ask it differently.
Sure. Shifting to the arm, are the same forces at play if instead of making contact with the head, you make contact with an arm, an outstretched arm?
They are. I just explained force is mass times acceleration. So if the arm weighs the same as the head, you're still going to get that same force, almost 1,000 pounds.
Does the arm weigh the same as the head?
It does, actually, almost identical, because your arm, just one of your arms, including the hand, forearm, and upper arm, is about 5% of your total body weight. So for someone who weighs 216 pounds, that comes out to about 10.8 pounds. So
okay, that's where they got the 11 pounds from.
Your arm, basically your whole arm, is about the same, weighs the same as your head.
So is your analysis the same then if the arm, close to an 11-pound arm, made contact with the taillight traveling 24 miles an hour, at 15 miles an hour, would you expect even more damage to the taillight at a higher speed?
Objection.
I'll allow it. Watch the leading.
Sure.
Yes, you would. If it's higher than 15 miles an hour and you have an arm actually striking that taillight, you're going to get even more significant fracturing, more damage to that taillight at a higher speed than what we saw.
So was the taillight
But what if it got swiped, though?
consistent or inconsistent with striking an arm?
It was, our findings was it's inconsistent for a number of reasons, but it's inconsistent with striking the arm. Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to shift back to the head injury that you saw. Was the head injury that you saw consistent with falling backward from a standing position onto a rigid surface?
That's certainly one of the possible scenarios. That would create the injury mechanism. You fall backwards, strike your head on concrete. That can produce thousands of pounds of force on the head. And so that's certainly a scenario where you could produce that damage if someone was standing, they fell backwards and struck their head on the roadway or on the curb or a hard surface.
So I was going to ask, you think you may just answer my question, those kinds of force multipliers require a hard, rigid surface or not?
They do, yes, sir.
So grass and dirt would not produce the same sort of force?
Grass and dirt, no, that would certainly not produce the same amount of force as hitting your head on concrete.
And if it was grass and dirt with a little bit of snow on the top of it, what effect is that?
That's going to dampen and lessen the force even more so.
That's what the pathologist said.
I want to shift back to the arm. I know we're going back and forth, but bear with me. Talking about the arm, if presuming a strike at, say, 24 miles an hour on just the arm, what kind of damage would you expect to see on the arm, irrespective of the vehicle?
You can see significant damage on the arm, especially if it hits at that taillight. Enough force to actually cause fracture of that taillight, that force is going to be concentrated at an initial point. And you're going to see at that point, you're going to see probably the most damage to the arm and to the skin there. So remember, at 15 miles an hour, that's about almost 1,000 pounds. So at 24, 25, it's even greater. So that amount of force on the arm, certainly you're going to see extensive subcutaneous lacerations, bruising, contusions. You're going to see most likely fracture of the arm as well. You're going to see significant damage. Just imagine having your arm out and being struck by a car at 25 miles an hour. There's going to be significant damage, more so compared to simply the abrasions that were diagnosed and documented on the arm in this case.
You did look at multiple photographs of the arm.
Aaron says, I think she was backing up. He bent forward through the glass at the car. It smashed back as he was hit, but I think she was putting on the brake to switch from reverse to forward when he hit. Yeah, because I was entertaining. I'm like, okay, what if they got an argument? He gets out of the car. He throws the glass at the taillight. And either she was in the middle of backing up the car and she didn't realize it swiped him, or she did it on purpose. And that's how it swiped his arm. And either it caused him to fall back on the back of his head, and then everyone is wrong that he wasn't unconscious right away, that he actually crawled to the grass. I don't know. I think the furthest that I could even reach to would be it was just an accident and the taillight swiped his arm. I wouldn't be able to move beyond that and be like, okay, well, it caused him to fall backwards and fall in the concrete and he crawled in the grass or didn't crawl in the grass. I don't know. Honestly, like the jury, I just can't imagine them being convinced that she did it on purpose. She hit him twice and then dipped out. Because let's say he threw the glass at her taillight, right? Maybe when she was really drunk, she assumed like, oh, you know, like he probably threw something at it. But then as he didn't return home, she's like, fuck, could I have hit him? Did I hit him? Did I hit him? I don't know if I did or not, right? I don't know.
In this case, of the John O'Keefe's arm in this case, right?
I did, yes, sir.
All right, were the injuries that you saw on John O'Keefe's right arm consistent with having been struck by a vehicle in the manner that you just described?
Objection.
That's sustained, Mr. Jackson.
You reviewed injuries specific to John O'Keefe, correct?
I did, yes.
Taking that as a hypothetical, would the injuries that you saw, generally speaking, hypothetically be consistent or inconsistent with having been struck by a car?
But if you ever hit something, you usually know. That's why I think that she probably heard her taillight getting hit by the cocktail glass, but there was probably no sound made as the taillight grazed his arm. But then also, the question I have is there's a dent above they call it the lift gate, but above the like the trunk latch thing. I don't know how there would have been a dent on there. Because we didn't see any damage on his left hand. Like, let's say he got sideswiped and then he punched the car with his left hand. I don't see any damage there. Tire marks. I just don't know if there's just no tire marks because it snowed. I don't know if that has any effect on the road and tire marks. And I don't know if there would even be tire marks because if she just had simply just did a 3-point turn and then scraped his arm and then dipped out, I don't know if there would be tire marks, right? I don't know. That's what's said. They were arguing big time, and it was at the end. He could have gotten a little. He could have got a hit a little, fell on his head, was half dead, crawled. Yeah, because like if I was a jury, I would just be like, okay, well, is it possible that he just got scraped by her, but maybe he was really drunk and he just somehow fell back, and I don't know. But there's also the lacerations on his eyebrow. So let's say if there were taillight pieces in his sweater, would he have gone like this and wiped his eye, and that's how he got scratched? I don't know. A lot of too many I don't knows.
At 24 miles an hour.
Objection.
Sustained.
A reproach.
Yes.
Hey, Roxanne, how are you doing today? I just don't know if there was enough ice on the road. I know everyone said that at midnight there was a light dusting. And then by the time it was when people were leaving, I think they were just being very careful to walk and not slip. But I don't know if there was like some solid sheets of ice, if the roads were like super slippery, if the snow was really soft still, how much snow was on the ground.
You are unmuted.
Yes.
Thank you. If you were to presume, for purposes of my question, that an arm was struck by a vehicle, taillight traveling at 24 miles an hour or thereabouts, would you expect to see patterned abrasions with no bruising?
Objection.
Or just what would you expect to see?
What would you expect to see?
So again, I would expect
The judge. I got you, Jackson. I'll make it a little bit easier for you.
to see significant trauma to the skin, to the bone, to the tendons. I wouldn't expect to see just abrasions, pattern abrasions. I mean, abrasion by very definition means that it's trauma to the skin, which is created through rubbing or grinding or friction. So it's basically something rubbing against the skin that basically wears away that top layer of skin. It's not blunt force trauma. If you have blunt force trauma, that produces a contusion or a bruising. It's not a laceration type injury where you have a cutting injury that actually produces a cut or a significant laceration. It's really just rubbing along the skin. So that would be inconsistent. If you have an arm that's actually struck at 25 miles an hour, you're going to have significantly greater damage, especially if there's a taillight that shatters. So you have the taillight coming in, it's hitting the arm, and it's moving forward into the arm. So if that actually caused fracturing of the taillight, then parts of that taillight are going to be pushed into the arm and likely embedded into the arm as the vehicle continues forward and pushes the arm out of the way. I didn't see any of that. Basically, just superficial abrasions, which all appear to have a similar amount of force. There's not a difference. That's the other thing. If you had a taillight shatter and explode on an arm, you would have some areas where you would have very deep contusions or lacerations, others lighter areas. But when you look at the abrasions that were noted in this case, they all appear to be the same force, generally the same direction, and the same severity, which would be inconsistent, in my opinion, with being struck at 25 miles an hour.
Generally speaking, you look for consistency in size of an object striking a body and the injury that the body suffers from being struck by the object.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, size is a big part of it, certainly. Yes.
So did you do any measurements of the size of the taillight, the width of the taillight that was shattered?
Yes.
And what was that width, if you can recall?
I think the width we looked at was maybe 6 inches or so.
In review of your, in coming to your opinions and conclusions, did you look at the arm of John O'Keefe just sort of laid out, straight out?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you see where the injury started and stopped, or began and ended, however you want to put it, in terms of size?
Yes, I mean, it started from the upper arm and then extended down into the forearm, which was greater than 12 inches of length, where you see those injuries and those abrasions occur.
Did you come to any conclusions or opinions concerning the size differential between the taillight and the injuries that you see?
Objection.
Sustained.
Generally speaking, would you expect, if there was an injuring event, that the size of the injury would be consistent with the thing that produced the injury?
Yes, generally speaking, you would certainly expect that. And again, you would normally and usually be able to see an initial point of contact, because that's where the most force is going to occur, where it causes that taillight to break. So you would have an area of severe damage, and then it would extend out likely to the edges.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was thinking too, because Higgins did say that when he was leaving 34 Fairview, his the snowplow thing was initially scraping the road, and he had to like lift it up. So I was wondering, like, did it scrape the road and maybe scrape John? But then again, he was found on the grass. I don't know.
Where it would contact the rest of the taillight.
From a biomechanics and or a physics standpoint, an engineering standpoint, is it reasonable if someone is standing with their arm extended to be hit by a moving vehicle, let's say 25 miles an hour, and the body, the center mass of the body, to be projected?
Objection.
Ask it differently.
Is it consistent, in your view, with engineering principles and physics principles that you know, if an arm is hit, extended, not the body, just the arm is struck, for the body then to be projected?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
It's not, no. So if we have contact, your arm's down, we have contact to the arm. I mean, first of all, it's a ball and socket joint, so the arm can move independently of the rest of the body. So with enough force, even if you're contracting your arm and trying to hold it out as tight as possible, it's going to overcome that muscular contraction and basically just move the arm. But secondly, it all depends on your center of mass. The center of mass is kind of the equilibrium point of your body of where your weight's distributed. And for most normal people, the center of mass occurs at your umbilicus or your belly button. So wherever your belly button goes, that's where your body's going to move. They teach this to football players, right? If you're a defensive back and a running back comes around the corner and it's you against him, they tell them or they teach them to watch the waist and watch the belly button. It doesn't matter what your head or your arms do or what their feet do. Wherever their belly button goes, that's where they're going to go. So that's what you want to tackle. So even if you had your arm straight out, again, we said it would move because of the joint. But let's assume you had a metal pole sticking out of your arm, out of your body instead of your arm, and that metal pole gets hit. What's going to happen to your body? It's just going to spin around, right? Because it's producing a moment arm, which produces a torque on the body. So your body's going to basically spin. In order to get the body, or the complete body, over, for instance, 10, 20, 30 feet into the yard, you need a force acting at the center of mass. You need an external force pushing the body that way. And
So no pirouette.
that's not going to happen if you just hit the arm. It's not enough force. It's not the right mechanism to actually cause the body to somehow move that far over.
Assuming that the body was struck with enough force at center mass to project that body 20, 30 feet, what injuries would you expect to be produced on that body?
Objection.
Sustained.
If you did have a body that was projected a distance, what injuries from a car, what injuries would you expect to see on the body?
Objection.
I'm going to see you at sidebar the last time on this.
Oh, you in trouble.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
Doctor, do you have my question in mind? You need me to repeat it?
Maybe repeat it, yeah.
Easy for you to say. Assuming that a body was struck at center mass with enough force from a vehicle traveling at whatever speed to project the body off the ground, would you expect to find injuries on that body?
You would, and you would actually see that there's specific injuries, because let's say you're standing forward and you get hit on the right side with a vehicle. You're going to get injuries and damage to the right side of the vehicle as that vehicle impacts you. It depends on the profile of the vehicle, how high the hood comes up, whether you're going to wrap up onto the hood, or if it's a van or the back of an SUV, it will project or push your entire body to the left. So you're going to get initial contact and injuries to the right side of your body, and then if it propels you into the air, you're going to get airborne, and then you're going to contact the ground, usually with the left side of your body. So then we're going to see a correlation.
Okay.
of injuries to the left side of your body as it slams down onto the ground as well. And at those speeds, normally you would also see more.
Oh, because I wasn't even thinking about that. When the trooper was saying that John O'Keefe was hit in the arm, I just thought it meant he was hit like this, not hit like this. I didn't even think about it from that way because the injuries doesn't look like he got hit like this. It looks like he was like standing and the tail light came and hit him like this. And I thought maybe that's why they thought he flew or something. But here's another thing I was thinking. Remember I told you if the arms were bent, I feel like we would see the scratches going in different directions. So one going this direction and then the other one going like that direction kind of because the arm is bent, right? So like when you outstretch it, it looks like it's going this direction and then that one's going like like this direction or something. Yeah, this direction. What if she was backing up and then John was like, oh, fuck, and then threw the glass at the car to be like, hey, like you're about to hit me, and then that's why his arm was outstretched. But then they say that if the arm was outstretched, the injury just doesn't really seem consistent with an arm being outstretched like that. Oh, so many questions. I want to know what happened. I want to know what happened. I just want to know what happened.
Abrasions, greater abrasions, or road rash along the entire part of the body as your body then would slide until it came to the point of rest.
Yeah, because if maybe I misunderstood the trooper, but maybe the trooper does think that John was hit from the side. If you were hit from the side, then you would land on the other side. You wouldn't be landing on the back of your head.
You did not see that instance.
Objection.
Okay. You have a moment?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Lally?
All right, Lolly, what you got? What you got, Lolly?
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Now,
Nose is itchy.
you, in conjunction with the other doctors on your team that conducted the analysis and testing in this case, you wrote a report, is that right?
We did, yes, sir.
And that report, was issued on February 12, 2024, is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And within the first paragraph of that report, the last two sentences state, this analysis is based on information currently available to ARCA and is only to be only to be issued in its entirety. However, ARCA reserves the right to supplement.
The CW never stated, John O'Keefe through the glass. Yeah, I know. The only reason why I'm hopping onto that theory is because of what Wolf said, Dr. Wolf said. Because I think I think the Commonwealth has it all wrong.
Supplement or revise this report if additional information becomes available. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes, sir.
Now, the information that you received and that you reviewed either individually or as a team, that included some state police reports. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Some Canton Police Department reports, correct?
Yes.
Some scene photos. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Medical examiner dispatch removal report. Is that right?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Some videos from the location of 34 Fairview Road. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Some photographs of the defendant's vehicle, the 2021 Lexus LX 570. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Photographs of evidence that was recovered from the scene. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
CDR reports from the defendant's Lexus.
Yes, sir.
And then essentially there were some other materials, whether they be literature or other things that you and your team of other doctors reviewed over the course of.
The legs barely had anything. I can show the legs again on the screen, but the legs, it was like I think the right leg. The left leg had nothing. The right leg had, they said it was an abrasion. It looked like there was like nothing there. Where is it? I'll show it again, but there's like barely anything on the right leg. I feel like the right leg might just be like him scratching his leg on the asphalt or sidewalk or something. But that wouldn't really correlate with the injuries that he has. I don't know. Also, you guys ever gotten drunk and fallen over before? You get like bruises everywhere. The fact that he has like such a lack of bruises, yeah, it's just really weird. Shit, where did I put it? Give me a second. All right, this is what he has on his leg. I don't know if the picture is just bad, but you barely see anything. It's like that little pink thing right there. It's like there's like nothing.
Formulating your opinions in this case, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Now, in regard to evidentiary materials that indicates within the report that were reviewed, you talk about the lens cap to the taillight assembly photographs of that nature, and then there's mention of a black straw that was found on scene, correct?
Yes, sir.
There's no mention in the report of either Mr. O'Keefe's shoe or his hat, correct?
Yes.
You are muted.
I just don't know if the shoe or the hat thing helps a lot, though. Like, I get it. You're trying to say that when people are hit by cars, they leave their shoe behind and possibly their hat. But why? Their theory is that they think John O'Keefe was holding the drinking glass when he was hit. So the shoe went, the hat went, but the drinking glass went with his body and he didn't let go of it. This is the Commonwealth's theory. That John was hit while holding the cocktail glass.
You are unmuted.
Well, they said that he fell on the back of his head, but then I'm also like, wouldn't you also have bruises on your back or maybe your buttocks or something like that? He was just wearing jeans and one layer of clothes. Or, sorry, maybe like, I don't know if he wore like a t-shirt underneath his thin hoodie.
Do you need a couple minutes, Mr. Lally, or do you need a minute?
No, it's fine now.
Yeah, I crawl too. Yeah, I crawl. When I used to get really, really drunk, I would wake up the next morning with so many injuries on my legs. I'm like, oh my God, I must have fallen and crawled around and did some crazy shit.
Thank you.
I wasn't sure if that was like a puncture where they inserted something into his like they gave him something directly to the bone. I think it was like an IV or something.
Doctor, are you familiar with a term called compression abrasions?
Compression abrasions? Yes.
And am I correct when I say compression abrasions are essentially when direct pressure from a blunt object together with slight rubbing movements produce skin and epidermal crushing? Is that what your understanding of the term is?
Yes, sir.
And you're familiar with pattern abrasions?
I am, yes.
All right, so we're back to compression abrasion again.
And pattern abrasions are injuries that show a distinct pattern that may reflect the shape of the impacting blunt objects that you may see with reference to injuries that are left by that blunt object. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Now, as far as in general terms, from what you reviewed, at any point in time did you look at a state police reconstruction report?
I don't believe that I did, no, sir.
You weren't provided with that, is that correct?
That's correct, I don't believe so.
You weren't provided with any sort of forensic reports, DNA or anything like that, is that correct?
I don't believe so, no, sir.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't know the significance of the compression abrasion and the pattern abrasion. I don't know where Lally was going with that.
And you never actually looked at the physical car, is that correct?
I did not, that's correct.
And you're aware that the physical car, being the defendant's car, is still in law enforcement custody and available for inspection if you had wanted to? Are you aware of that?
I think I'm aware of that, yes, sir.
Did you never made that request, is that correct?
That was not necessary in this case to inspect the vehicle.
Doesn't look like car damage, question mark. A lot of people just have an issue with believing that because of the lack of bruises and like he didn't have any like broken bones or fractures or anything like that.
Necessary, no, you didn't make that request, correct?
Yeah, I don't remember if we made that request or not. We obviously didn't look at the...
I mean, and also I was thinking like, okay, well, what if he, because I don't remember the position where they found his body. What if he hit his head on the fire hydrant as he flew onto the grass area and then slid off of it? But I don't remember how close he was to the fire hydrant or the flagpole. I think he was like around that vicinity. But I don't know if the fire hydrant was like where his like feet was facing or where his head was facing. I don't remember. But I mean, the Commonwealth hasn't said any of that. They haven't said that like, oh, they think that his head hit the fire hydrant or the flagpole. So we don't really even have to go there as the jury. But we're just trying to think outside of the box because, you know, a lot of us are just like, okay, how could this have happened?
At the vehicle, but it wasn't necessary in this case.
Did you ever look at the actual taillight pieces or the taillight housing, is that correct?
Not the actual, we looked at photographs of the evidence, yes.
Now, the injuries that you observed or reviewed in materials in regard to Mr. O'Keefe were primarily on the right side of his body, is that correct?
Well, sir, on the right arm, in the posterior aspect of the right arm, yes. And then the skull fracture was a little bit to the right, the occipital fracture.
Also bruising on his right hand, is that correct?
There was bruising on the back of his right hand, yes.
The dorsal aspect?
Yes, correct.
And there was also bruising on sort of the posterior of his right knee, is that correct?
There was a small bruise, I believe, yes, sir.
Yeah, it was like barely anything.
Now, with respect to within your report, you talk about the numerous linear abrasions on the posterior of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm and forearm, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in relation to those injuries, there's a sentence in which you or whoever authored this part of the report, I'm assuming it's you, indicate that furthermore, any such injuries would be highly improbable if Mr. O'Keefe was wearing a jacket, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that Mr. O'Keefe was not wearing a jacket other than a long sleeve sort of hooded shirt?
I believe that came to light afterwards. Again, it doesn't affect my actual opinions in this case, but it was a sentence added in there, yes, sir.
And so also within your report, same paragraph, you indicate blood and DNA transfer would also be highly probable under such circumstances, none of which were reportedly found on the tail lamp assembly or any of the fractured pieces, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that DNA consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe was actually found on the tail light housing from the defendant's vehicle?
I'm aware after we wrote or issued the report that it became known to us that I believe DNA was tested and some DNA was found, I believe a small amount. I don't believe any blood evidence was located or found on any pieces, but there was indication of DNA on the taillight housing.
There was also DNA matching Mr. O'Keefe that was found on the exterior of a piece of drinking glass that was found right near his body.
Yeah, I know that was a theory that's been floated out there, that he got into the house, there was a fight, the dog was trying to protect its owners, and he either got hit with like a weight or fell backwards, something like that. I know that was a theory out there, but in terms of like what I've seen in the trial so far, I just didn't get there. Yeah, with the dog stuff, with, you know, being attacked by the people in the house, I just didn't get there. But I know it's a theory that's out there.
I believe so, yes.
I feel like something just happened in front of the house, and we just don't know what the fuck happened.
And there was also pieces approximately 1/16 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch of clear and red plastic that was subsequently found to be consistent with the defendant's taillight that was found embedded within Mr. O'Keefe's shirt.
Within the shirt, I believe, yes, sir. Not his actual body.
And then also, I don't know. I guess like it's possible that there could have been fragments in the shirt, but because he was wearing the shirt, it wouldn't have penetrated into his skin. Because it was found in his skin. I'm sure that's something that the medical examiner would point out. But I don't know. Maybe the shirt protected from the fragments from going to his skin. But that definitely did come up in my mind where it's like, oh, did they find fragments on his skin?
And so this is all things that you found out after you issued your report in February of 2024, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Now, when you were talking about the injuries to the back of the head of Mr. O'Keefe,
Yeah, that was my other thought that I had too. I was like, okay, well, what if John was dropped off in front of the house? He didn't make it inside the house yet. The dog was let out, and then maybe no one knew that a dog somehow escaped the backyard and then attacked John and then went back inside the house. But I mean, because they didn't find the dog DNA or anything, I'm like, I don't know, I can't really go there.
consistent with coming in contact with a hard surface, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would that hard surface include if the ground was frozen?
Well, you'd have to perform an analysis actually, because you'd have to determine how hard that ground was. You'd have to look at the freeze and thaw cycle, probably leading up to weeks of that. You can't just look at ground and say, well, it's below freezing, so that ground must be frozen. I mean, is it a possibility? It may be, but you have to go through an actual analysis and procedure to determine how hard that ground is and whether it could have produced those injuries.
So it is something that's capable of being done by you, is that correct?
Performing that type of an analysis? You could go through and do it, sure, yeah.
And you didn't do it, correct?
No, I did not do it, no, because, yeah, there's no need in this case. We don't know what happened in this case. There's no indication of, certainly, it's not consistent with getting hit by the car and ending up where he did, even if the ground is somehow hard enough to cause that type of an injury. Again, there's no movement and no force to get his body over there, and the damage with the car is inconsistent with him being struck by it. So whether the ground could cause it or not, the roadway could cause it, the curb could cause it, a back could cause it. There's numerous different possibilities, and we don't really have enough evidence in this case to determine what one specific event actually caused that injury.
You didn't have enough evidence based on what you were provided, isn't that fair to say?
I didn't have enough evidence based on what I was provided, and even looking at the additional evidence that I became aware of after the fact, there's still no evidence. I mean, you can't deny the science and the physics as to what would have happened if he was struck by the vehicle. So anything past that, you have to somehow overcome that hurdle, which is very difficult to do.
You can't deny the physics, he said.
When was it that you looked at this additional material, and who provided it to you?
We were informed after a report was issued that DNA was found, and that was really the primary issue. I believe that some DNA was found on the housing, which, again, there's numerous explanations or ways that DNA can get on a light housing.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this, sir. With regard to the materials that you were provided with, was there anything in there that stated that Mr. O'Keefe's skull fracture on the back of his head was caused by contact with the tail?
No, I don't believe there was anything in those materials that stated
Is there anything in those materials that indicated or that anyone stated at any point in time that Mr. O'Keefe's arm was outstretched at
But they wanted to explore that just in fucking case.
the time that he was struck by the vehicle?
No, sir, there wasn't.
Was there anything in there indicating that his arm was tucked in at the time that he was struck by the vehicle?
You know, there's no indication in any of that evidence of what he may or may not have been doing, how he may or may not have been positioned. I mean, that's the whole issue. There's no evidence to indicate what may have allegedly occurred in this case.
Now, a typical pedestrian collision that you see through the course of your work involves a pedestrian being struck by the front of a vehicle. Is that fair to say?
I see all types of different people getting run over backwards, cars spinning, hitting sideways. Frontal impacts certainly occur, yes, but we see pedestrians getting struck by all parts of the vehicle.
I'm sure you see all kinds. What I'm asking you is predominantly when you see a pedestrian collision, the typical pedestrian collision.
A guy does an overlay that shows the taillight with the abrasion on the arm. Oh, can you post it in my Discord? I want to take a look at it. Please, if you're in it.
collision would be a pedestrian crossing a road in front of a vehicle as it's approaching. Is that correct?
That's certainly not uncommon, yes, sir.
Now, as far as
Maybe a physical altercation. That's what people were thinking, that it could have been a physical altercation, because when the pictures of John O'Keefe was shown, I think like, I don't know if it was like a year plus ago, people saw like two black guys. They saw scratches, and they saw like an injury to the nose area, and they were like, oh, it looks like he got in a fight and got attacked by a dog.
maybe described a little bit on your direct testimony, as far as there's differences in the type of injuries that you would expect or anticipate depending on how the vehicle interacted with the pedestrian in a pedestrian collision, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as far as you're familiar with what's called the sideswipe collision?
Yes, sir, I am.
Oh, sideswipe. Okay, tell me about the sideswipe, because that's the only thing that I could see possibly happening to him. Maybe just a sideswipe when the taillight was broken.
Am I correct when I say that in a typical pedestrian collision with a pedestrian crossing in front of a vehicle, there are a number of different types of interactions as far as a rapid and forward projection versus a fender ball versus a number of different ways that a pedestrian can interact with the front of a vehicle, correct?
No, just kidding. I don't think the sideswipe is what I'm thinking of. I think sideswipe might be something else.
Depends on the position of the pedestrian and certainly the profile of that vehicle and the speed of the vehicle. Yes, sir. There's many different factors involved in it.
And so in a typical pedestrian collision, when a pedestrian is struck by the front of the vehicle, that involves more of an assumption of the velocity of the striking motor vehicle by the pedestrian than you would expect to see in a sideswipe collision, correct?
Well, I mean, yes, generally speaking, a sideswipe means that the person or the pedestrian in the vehicle don't obtain a similar or common velocity. So if you're standing in front of a car and it hits you, it's going to speed you up to that same speed and then disengage. The sideswipe means that there's not this mass-to-mass impact. By its very nature, sideswipe has minimal forces. We see it even between vehicles that just rub against each other. So if there's a sideswipe impact with a pedestrian in a vehicle, there's going to be very little damage to the pedestrian. And similarly, there's going to be very little movement. There's really no force at all acting. You know, for instance, if a car came and swiped by your arm, but didn't have enough force or enough contact to cause any damage, well, it wouldn't actually cause any movement of the person either. So a sideswipe by its very nature involves minimal impact.
Minimal impact wouldn't cause much movement to the individual either. Okay, that's what I'm waiting for. That's what I'm waiting to hear. So is it possible, let's say if he did get hit by the tail light, it might have just scratched him, you know, and he somehow just sustained those injuries in the back of head later on in a different manner?
You know, for instance, if a car came and swiped by your arm, but didn't have enough force or enough contact to cause any damage, well, it wouldn't actually cause any movement of the person either. So a sideswipe by its very nature involves minimal impact, minimal forces, minimal velocities.
You also contain in the report that you at least co-authored, there's an indication that Mr. O'Keefe's injuries, at least to his skull, the fracture to his skull, are consistent with him having been pushed or possibly been impacted by the subject Lexus and fallen backward.
But that's not what the state's theory is. That's not what Trooper Paul said, though. Trooper Paul wasn't like, oh, she hit him and then sideswiped his arm and that's it. Trooper Paul was like, no, he like either flung onto the driveway, or sorry, not the driveway, onto the grass, or he sort of spun a little bit and then fell backwards. But then we don't know how he would have ended up on the grass. Something like that.
Or striking his head. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so that's another possibility.
Sorry, sir, yes or no?
No, let him answer. Let him answer.
Yeah, let him answer. We want to hear the full answer.
So if we're saying that there's enough force if you fall backwards to strike your head and cause that skull fracture, well, he could have slipped and struck his head. The car could have backed up and not known that he was there and nudged him and caused him to fall. I mean, any event that would cause him to fall backwards obviously would result in him.
There we go. And that right there, I think the jury's going to possibly latch onto and be like, that could have just happened. And to me, it's very different than, oh, Karen Reed was raging and backed up into him, hit him twice, and then drove off, you know, because she didn't give a fuck that he was in the snow, laying out there injured. That's like very different. That's a very different scenario, in my opinion.
So that's another possibility.
Sorry, sir, yes or no?
No, let him answer. Let him answer the question.
So if we're saying that there's enough force if you fall backwards to strike your head and cause that skull fracture, well, he could have slipped and struck his head. The car could have backed up and not known that he was there and nudged him and caused him to fall. I mean, any event that would cause him to fall backwards obviously would result in him striking his head. So there's numerous, almost infinite possibility of different scenarios that could result in that type of.
But I guess the Commonwealth could argue, be like, oh, well, if she was just backing up, why was she going so fast, going 24 miles an hour? But then you guys mentioned, oh, what if her car slipped? Could that have registered her going 24 miles? I don't think so, because I think it depends on like the wheel rotation, right? Oh, I don't know. Okay, back to like a bunch of questions that we have. There's just so many questions.
Okay.
No, he was there.
Mr. Jackson? Okay, Dr. Wenchley, you are all set, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, jurors, I want to see counsel for the last time at sidebar right now.
Ay, ay, ay. Well, at least it's over for the jury. They just have to listen to closing arguments and deliberate. Jesus.
The evidence in this case, after all these weeks, that's the evidence that you will hear in this case. The lawyers and I still have work to do for tomorrow. But tomorrow morning, we will have closing arguments of counsel. They'll get an hour apiece to be able to argue this case to you.
Yeah, I thought Lolly would have a weatherman to go up there and testify and talk about how many inches of snow was on the ground.
Structure in the law, and then 12 of you will begin your deliberations sometime tomorrow. Okay, so with that, please do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see...
Well, I would assume they would use the RPM to determine what speed the car was going, because if the car starts sliding, what indicator would they use to show that the car was going X amount of speed and then also sliding at the same time? You know what I mean? Unless there's like some sensors that detects, okay, well, let's see, you know, how far we're traveling. I don't think the sensors would do that. I think the sensors just shows that, like, okay, if there's going to be like an impact, or if there's like an item near there where it might hit you or something like that. But I feel like for them to find out that it was 24 miles per hour that she was going, I mean, it's probably like, you're probably seeing how fast the tires are rotating. I don't know if the tires were rotating and then it was also sliding on the ground, if that would contribute to how fast the car thinks it's going. Does that make sense? How did they get 24 miles per hour? Hey, Larry, how's it going? They got some information from the car. I don't know what it was called. There's so many different vocabularies that they use for the Lexus Toyota system, but they downloaded some information and then it said that the car was going in reverse 24 miles per hour. But they weren't able to get other very important information.
See, hear, read anything about this case, please disregard it. Let us know. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, so the court, please.
Jesus.
Follow me, please.
Go back and look at Auntie Bev gazing googly eyes at Dr. Wolf when he first sat down. I'm good, thank you.
Jimmy, I'll have to turn it on that one. I'll turn it on in a second.
Oh, wait, I want to hear what she's whispering, though, because I'm nosy as heck. What did she say?
Jimmy.
The black box wasn't broken. It was the previous witness that talked about how the black box wouldn't have registered a pedestrian vehicle collision because running into a pedestrian wouldn't generate an event for the car. Because when you're hitting a pedestrian, you're not really coming into like an abrupt stop, I guess, because of the pedestrian, because there's such a weight difference. That's what I'm assuming, the weight difference. But he did mention that, you know, there is no information from the black boxes because the event wouldn't have triggered something for Lexus or Toyota to record it. That's what I remember.
I'll have to turn it on that one. I'll have to turn it on in a second.
She says, I don't have time to move on with that now or something. I don't have time for something. I don't know. She doesn't have time for something. And that's it. Okay. Closing arguments. Wait, what's this? Oh, hold on. What is this footage? Oh, is that Karen Reed? Oh no, that's it. That's where it ends. I know they did the jury instructions. Let me see if I can find. We're not going to listen to it though. I just want to see what they said at the end. Jury instruction stuff. They've already sent the jury back. Let's see. Jury instructions. Jury instructions. Let me see if I could find the law and crime version. Did you guys watch the jury instruction stuff? The Lexus backup feature would have never allowed her to hit. I don't know. I'm not quite sure about that. I know that like if the car thinks it's colliding with something, it'll do like the force brake. I don't know if that counts for people or if people can. I mean, I would assume it would because I'm sure they wouldn't want cars hitting people. But that I don't know. That's why I was thinking like, what if it's just like a side swipe of the arm, you know? Okay, I want to listen to this just for a second. Let's see what they say. I think they're trying to do the jury instruction, blah, 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 blah. Let's see what's at the end.
Know that? Do you want me to use it?
No, if they know it, we'll use it. We'll talk about this.
Okay.
All right. Why did you want to move them into? We'll talk about this.
Okay.
All right.
No, what is that done?
At the At the end of the instruction, before I give the instruction on be fair, the SJC instruction on be fair.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
You pick a full person?
Yes. Yeah.
So sometimes it's done by lottery. I just want to
No, it's right. In Massachusetts, it's supposed to be chosen by the judge. So I know. All right. Anything else?
Learn more about Massachusetts.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow. Jim.
Boyd, all rise.
Tomorrow, are they going to say anything else about closing arguments?
Good afternoon, Mr. Porges. I'm glad you're joining us. Good afternoon, Mr. Tipton. It's nice to see you all. What is our next event? And do you want to get a tentative trial date? Are we far from that?
Wait, is this like someone else's case?
Well, if I could bring up the dispute and discovery, that might put things in context.
Sure.
I filed a notice of discovery in court. What I had previously turned over all of this, I believe, at the end of March to counsel.
Okay.
What is this? Is this someone else's case?
I can tell the court that I've
That's not Mr. Lally.
received all of the crime lab materials and I've just finished downloading them today. So there's another notice of discovery going to counsel for all of the crime lab materials, with the exception of the state DNA lab expects to finish their testing on items at the end of this month. So there'll be more discovery coming from that.
How many items do they have?
I believe there's about 12, Your Honor.
Okay.
And then
Whose case is this?
Bodie has
an email last week, and
I don't recognize any of these people. Who are these people? Okay, I don't feel so bad for us. Taxi! Thank you so much for the $2.49. Thank you so much for supporting the stream. I appreciate it. Okay, we're back to Karen Reed. Okay, that was someone else's case. I don't know who that was. So what do you guys think? Beyond a reasonable doubt, yes or no?
All right. So the
This
charge
guy
conference,
is
the first
awake.
question I have is regarding I'll go through them in the order that I have them in my very rough draft, but there is no request of the lesser included offense of voluntary manslaughter to the second degree.
Oh, no inclusion of the lesser. Okay.
Murder charges. That what the Commonwealth's intention is, not to request an instruction on voluntary manslaughter as a lesser included of the second degree murder?
I'm sorry. That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. And neither side has requested an instruction of a lesser.
I remember it was like second degree murder. It was vehicular manslaughter. And fuck, what's the other one? It's like where you like leave the scene.
Included of OUI?
Oh yeah, OUI, operating while intoxicated.
It's correct as well.
And the defense is not requesting that?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. An instruction of a lesser included of OUI?
It's correct as well.
And the
Is
defense
it OUI? Sometimes it depends on what state you're in. Operating under influence?
is not requesting that?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. So. All right. So the first instruction, the request from the defense is that I split the charge, and it's written that way. I'm not going to split the charge. So the way it'll be is the defense will argue first, then the Commonwealth, and then I just go through all the instructions. So aside from that, the first.
What? Wait, the defense gets to go first? Oh, wait, is it always like this? The defense goes first? Oh, yeah, that's true. In opening statements is the other. Yeah, that's true. So closing, we get to listen to defense first, and then we'll go to the state. Sherry, thank you so much for the 10. I appreciate it. Thank you. I don't know if you missed it, but we've already done our marriage paperwork stuff. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was from a couple years ago, but thank you so much for your support. And it will go towards maybe some doggy snacks for Shiro, wherever he is. He's somewhere around here. Thank you. I appreciate that.
First instruction is presumption of innocence. I have one that I typically give, but I will give the one that's requested by the defense. Next instruction is our reasonable doubt instruction. Then function of the jury, the arguments of the lawyers and the judge's comments, function of the judge, functions of the lawyers.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, she said the defense was going to go first. Defense and then the state.
Verdict must be based on the evidence.
Maybe I misunderstood that?
I've incorporated some of what you've both included into that. I have language here that similarly, as you review the exhibits, you may find that some information has been removed because it is not relevant. Please ignore that and don't try and guess what may have been removed or why. I think that came from the defendant's request.
Okay.
Any information that you may have read, heard, or seen about the case outside of the courtroom is not evidence. My instructions to you.
That's what I heard too, but I know some of the members of the jury were dismissed, so I don't know if it's still 9 women on there or if there are alternates that came in that were men. So that I'm not too sure. All right, so I don't know. That's it. Tomorrow, I'll listen to closing arguments when they are done because the jury's going to deliberate. I mean, obviously, probably more than 2 hours, but I just wonder if the jury, if they're just going to be like, "What the fuck was that? We need to talk about this because my mind is all over the place. We need to have like a little mini therapy session and just talk about what the fuck we just sat through." I wouldn't be surprised if they just want to just talk everything out because it was such a shit snowstorm. Oh boy. Okay, so closing arguments tomorrow. Tomorrow I will start after closing arguments. So I'm not going to do it live because I'm sorry, just too early for me. I'll try to wake up a little bit earlier though. But we're not going to do it live. It's too early. But guys, trauma bonded. I'm sure they have a lot of notes and I'm sure they're very confused. Because remember, they weren't allowed to take their notes home and review it. They just left everything there. You don't think it's going to be a quick verdict? I think they have a lot to talk about. Just a lot to talk about. But, you know, it's also possible if they just don't want to. It's also possible that if they just feel like, you know what, like they didn't really show that she did it. It could just also be maybe a quick one too. But I would expect they probably want to talk about what it was that they sat through. Oh, man. Yeah, and I think ending with these 3 expert witnesses today that were very clear and concise and straight to the point. They weren't defensive on the stand. They did really good in cross-examination. I think ending with these 3 witnesses were probably really great for them. If anything, more confusing for the state's case. But I think they did a really good job at explaining this is what didn't happen to John O'Keefe. Now, they don't know what happened to John O'Keefe, but they were able to explain this is what didn't happen to him. And they seem very confident about it. Yeah, I'm very curious because I know there's an FBI investigation pending. So I'm interested to learn more about that whenever they're done. That would be crazy. Yeah. And they weren't even paid by the defense. You know, imagine just having these freebie witnesses. All right, y'all. I hope you guys have a good one. We're getting to here. If you guys want to chat about anything else, feel free before I go. But I mean, to really just sum it up, like I said, we had 3 experts go up there to tell us what they believe didn't happen to John. They don't believe that he was hit by Karen's car in such a manner that the state has presented, where he was hit in the hand, left a dent, and then hit the arm, caused him to fly or either fall back, hurt himself in some way where he landed on the back of his head. Yeah. And I think they did a really good job. That's about it. I don't know. I mean, I feel like we just reiterated everything over and over again. Lolly could have used the witnesses as well, but it went against, of course it did. Of course he didn't want to use these witnesses. Thank you, Corgi. I hope you guys have a good one. What an interesting case. And a very confusing one. At least I feel like we know what probably didn't happen to John. Now, do we know what did happen to him? No, not really. Thank you for the stream. Yeah, thanks for hanging out. I'm going to go eat, and I'm going to figure out what we're going to do for the rest of the day. But if I have no other plans, probably just stream on Twitch and do some Elder Ring and get my ass whooped. Oh, God, it's gonna be hard. We'll see how it is. Guys, have a good one. Take care. I will see you guys later. On Friday, I read Sarah Boone's 58-page letter. However, 58 pages does sound very... it it's not really, she didn't really write 58 pages. Well, she did. Sorry, she did write 58 pages, but most of it were just definitions that she wrote just to be condescending to the fucking judge. Oy. But yeah, we posted a video on that. So you guys haven't seen it yet. It's already been posted. I'm just so glad that this trial is over. Jesus. I'm just over this trial. We're over it. Glad it's over. I'm sure they're going to come back with not guilty because they did not find it was beyond a reasonable doubt. Not even close to beyond a reasonable doubt. But as attorneys always say and reporters, you never know with the jury. You never know. You never know what's going to happen. But that's my guess. That's what I think. Maybe they'll stay for pizza. You want to free the Boone? I mean, she does want to be released on, on bond. She's like, why can't I be released on bond? So what that I'm being accused of murder? I'm not a murderer. All right, guys. Take care. Have a good day. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Again, I'm going to stream the closing arguments, but I'm not going to stream it live. I will stream it when it's done. And my stream will probably start, I don't know, just join the Discord. We have notifications on there, right? Join the Discord if you haven't already. Have your notifications on. Again, I appreciate you guys being here. And I hope you guys take care. She thinks she's innocent. Yeah, she says that she's not a murderer. She says she's intelligent. There's a lot of things that she